In one life, the grass and trees had 3 autumns. Those who did what they wanted to do were called gentlemen. Those who did not do anything were heroes. The meaning of a hero was not to save the common people from fire and water. A hero dared to risk the world's condemnation, knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, but still went to the mountain. Although there were tens of millions of people, he still went forward. Thus, Supreme Gai Fu was worthy of the title of a hero. He had used his own body to start the epic beginning of this great catastrophe war, reversing the situation of victory and defeat between the 2 universes. However, as Void God walked out of the crack in the sky, an extremely magnificent power instantly descended on the scene, isolating the countless divine power universe supreme beings who were killing each other. Lord Void God, the right Void emissary, knelt on the ground with a guilty expression. As the 2 commanders of this battle, he and the left Void emissary had undoubtedly failed in their command. Useless trash. Void God shook his head coldly. He then turned his gaze to Cosmos God and let out a low, masculine voice. Cosmos God, it's been 100,000 void epochs since I last saw you. Your improvement has truly disappointed me. The expression of Cosmos God sank when he heard this, but he did not reply. Void God was born by devouring all the negative emotions in the world, such as desire, greed, obsession, blood, and resentment. 100,000 void eras ago, he had been wounded severely. Unexpectedly, after 100,000 void eras, not only had he recovered, but his power had also improved. It was hard for anyone to deal with him now. Void God shook his head and said, Cosmos God, I know what you're planning. You've sent someone into our void universe and used the Fengtian flag to close the Void Rift's passageway, right? Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank immediately. He knows about the existence of the Fengtian flags? Before Cosmos God could reply, Void God's gaze turned again and swept across the faces of the supremes of the divine power universe one by one. Finally, his gaze fell on Jian Wushuang. If I'm not wrong, this is the person who entered the Void universe, right? Void God stretched out his finger and pointed at Jian Wushuang. Suddenly, his fingertips seemed to have turned into a vortex. Black fog gathered at his fingertips and turned into a terrifying black light beam that instantly hit Jian Wushuang. He did not expect that Void God would suddenly attack him. The change happened so quickly that it caught everyone off guard. Under the black light, Jian Wushuang was like an ant facing the collapse of the 5 mountains. He could not resist at all. The gap between him and Void God was too big. He was like a weak infant facing a mythological giant that was hundreds of millions of feet tall. Even if he blew on him, Void God could kill Jian Wushuang. Just as Jian Wushuang clenched his fist and a trace of madness and unwillingness surged in his eyes, a low and cold snort suddenly sounded in the void. Then, Cosmos God appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. Void God, isn't it too much to attack a junior like this? Cosmos God spoke indifferently. At the same time, he extended his hand and waved it. In an instant, the black light beam was brushed away by Cosmos God and disappeared. Void God did not look regretful, but shook his head indifferently. Cosmos God, do you think that just because you used the Fengtian flag to seal the tear in the void, I have no other way? Let's go, Void God said with a faint smile. Black mist immediately surged out of Void God's body. It was mixed with something that looked like a Rubik's Cube, and it quickly rushed toward the crack in the void. The moment Cosmos God saw the Rubik's Cube, his expression changed slightly. He frowned and said, Space-time tunnel lock? Void God, did you make a deal with the devouring emperor? Void God did not answer. Instead, he raised his head and closed his eyes. He spread his arms as if he was hugging the world. Open space-time lock. Rumble. In an instant, more and more black mist rose from Void God's body. In the end, they all rushed into the crack in the void. In the black fog, there were terrifying sound waves that sounded like the wails of vengeful spirits, making one's scalp tingle. Boom, boom, boom. Muffled sounds kept coming from the cracks in the void, followed by the aura of the void universe. The crack began to spread at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the crack gradually grew larger. It was like a giant that was about to open its eyes and wake up from a deep sleep. The Feng Tian flag has loosened. Jian Wushuang's expression changed slightly. He could sense that the 99 Feng Tian flags, which had been deeply inserted into the void in the void forbidden land of the void universe, were being pushed out by a strange force. It was like a nail that had been deeply rooted in the ground and was ruthlessly pulled out. One side, two sides, three sides, 99 Feng Tian flags appeared from the void. The void crack that led to the two universes was still getting bigger. In the void universe, in the void forbidden land, Hong Fo and the void master Ba Huang had been as anxious as ants on a hot pan. They paced back and forth with gloomy faces, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, Elder Hong Fo's face lit up and he said, "Lord Ba Huang, look, the seal of the void forbidden land is loosening." "What?" Ba Huang looked up and immediately noticed that small black flags with divine patterns were constantly appearing in the void. Not only that, but the 87th spatial crack was also expanding at a shocking speed. It must be Lord Void God's doing. In the divine power universe, the off-world battlefield, countless void masters of the void universe looked at the expanding crack in the void and felt the aura from the void universe. They were instantly invigorated and their faces lit up. "Lord Void God, your power is heavenly." The 99th Feng Tian flag was pulled out of the void forbidden land. Boom! All of a sudden, a loud explosion rang out. The channel connecting the two universes had been completely opened. The crack in the void had already expanded to about 10,000 feet. It was like the giant mouth of a monster, quietly pressing down on the void. Even the wind from the void universe had already blown out from the crack. The supreme experts of the divine power universe were shocked. Even the hearts of Cosmos God sank. "Lord Cosmos God, I would like to go and kill them immediately. Otherwise, once they return to the void universe and recover, it will definitely be a great calamity for our divine power universe." Supreme Sui Shi, the captain of Team 9, took a step forward and said in a deep voice, "That's right. We can't let them go back. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to annihilate them. Once they escape and return, we'll have a chance to recover and make a comeback. That'll be the real disaster for our divine power universe." The crazy alcoholic Immortal Hulu also said with a cold expression, "It's too late." Upon hearing this, Cosmos God shook his head and sighed. It was as though he was trying to verify the words of Cosmos God. Just as the divine power universe was about to give it a try and gather all its strength to kill all the void masters in the divine power universe, Void God turned around and looked at the 30 void masters behind him, who were all in varying degrees of weakness. He snorted and said, "Let's go." After saying that, Void God Cultivator rolled up his sleeve and put the 36 Scar Void Masters and hundreds of ordinary Void Masters into his sleeve. Then he stepped into the crack in the void. The divine power universe had come with an invincible posture, but in the end, it had ended in a sorry state. However, none of the people from the divine universe showed any joy. It seemed that the divine power universe had won the head-on battle between the two universes, and the divine power universe had been defeated. In reality, this was not the case. Although the divine power universe had defeated several void masters in this battle, it was not a serious injury. The divine power universe had set up all kinds of means for this battle, such as the hundreds of killing formations and the 99 Fengtian flags that Jian Wushuang had set up in the void forbidden land. They were planning to greatly damage the divine power universe or even annihilate it completely in one fell swoop. However, the reality was the complete opposite of what they had expected. Opportunities were fleeting. However, this opportunity had already passed away for the divine power universe. He did not need to think to know that the next time the divine power universe made a comeback and attacked, it would definitely be fully prepared. At that time, it would be a catastrophe for the divine power universe. And this day was clearly not going to be long. Detestable! An invincible supreme punched the air in front of him, shattering it like a mirror as he vented his frustration. Although the other invincible supremes did not express their inner depression like this person, their faces were all gloomy and unsightly. Jian Wushuang put the Tarot Divine sword back into its scabbard and sighed. Without the Devourer's interference, they might have achieved their goal. At least, Jian Wushuang was sure that the ordinary Void Masters in the Divine Power universe would definitely be annihilated. None of them would be able to escape. Without the spacetime lock provided by the Devourers, Void God would not be able to open the channel between the two universes. At least half of the 6 Scar Void Masters would die here. Unfortunately, no matter how they planned, they did not expect the Devourers. All right, let's go back and prepare. Cosmos God took in a deep breath and spoke in a deep voice. He was the leader of the Divine Power universe. Although he was also depressed about this battle, he knew he could not show it. If he showed any signs of dejection, the Divine Power universe would be finished. The Divine Power universe might seem tough, but it was actually a rope that was tied to Cosmos God. All right, everyone nodded their heads and followed behind Cosmos God as they headed back to the base camp. The off-world battlefield became quiet again. Only a pile of broken limbs and countless divine power fluctuations were left, confirming the tragic battle just now. However, as time passed, these traces of battle would be silently swallowed by the universe and repeated. The universe would never change. It was like a ruthless and constantly running machine, silently watching the change of times, the rise and fall of the tide. Even if the people of the Divine Power universe entered, the ones who would disappear would be the cultivators living in the Divine Power universe. Back at the base camp, some of the supreme experts in charge of guarding the camp saw everyone's serious faces and silent appearances. They also knew that this battle would not end well. Hence, they did not open their mouths to ask anything. Instead, they called out Lord Cosmos God in a low voice and did not say anything else. Yes, Cosmos God nodded at them before saying, "Come to the main hall and discuss the next step of the plan." There was a hint of fatigue in his voice. After saying that, Cosmos God did not say anything more. He walked toward the great hall by himself. At this moment, everyone realized. Unknowingly, Cosmos God's back, which was originally straight and upright, had become slightly hunched. His back view appeared thin and lonely. Seeing this, everyone could not help but look at each other and sigh. The pressure on Cosmos God was the greatest among them. He had shouldered too much. "Let's go." The Overlord Patriarch took in a deep breath and followed behind Cosmos God with large strides, heading into the Great Hall. After entering the hall, everyone cupped their hands and said, "We pay our respects to Lord Cosmos God." At a time like this, there's no need to talk about these unnecessary formalities. Cosmos God waved his hand, a hint of fatigue in his eyes. After saying that, Cosmos God did not say anything else. Instead, he cast his gaze toward the Great Hall. Some of the seats were already empty. One of the seats closer to the front was the seat of Team 5's captain, Supreme Zerowood. It was empty there. The position was still there, but the person would never come back. Supreme Zerowood died at the hands of the first ancestor of the Sky Glory Holy Land in the Divine Power universe. The captain of Team 4, Supreme Jin Yen, said softly. Among the 9 captains, he had the best relationship with Supreme Zerowood. The two of them lived in the same era and were the 2 heavens favorites of that era. Later on, they entered the off-world battleground together and fought side by side. It could be said that they were the closest family in the world. Yes, Cosmos God nodded his head. Little Lon, later on, go to the heroic rankings and inscribe Supreme Zerowood's name on it. Yes, Master, Lon replied softly. Even though she was the disciple of a Cosmos God and had a revered status, she had also joined this battle. Furthermore, her face was pale and her aura was weak. She had suffered considerable injuries on the battlefield. Without letting his negative and sorrowful emotions spread, Cosmos God took in a deep breath and forced himself to focus. His gaze regained its sharpness as he swept his gaze across everyone's faces and said, "What are your plans for the future?" As soon as he said this, everyone looked at each other, and no one spoke. He had already used all the methods he could. In a battle of this level, ordinary schemes and intrigues were no longer of any use. After a long time, White Ape, the Overlord Patriarch, stood up from his seat and said with a resolute tone, "There's no other way. We'll deal with it when the soldiers come. We'll deal with it when the water comes. We'll fight to the death." A battle to the death? Upon hearing this, Cosmos God's eyes narrowed before he nodded. His eyes were filled with boundless killing intent and determination. "That's right. We'll fight to the death." Upon hearing this, the other supreme martial artist's eyes lit up. Indeed, at this point in time, all schemes and intrigues were just a joke if he wanted to defeat the divine power universe. They only had one path to take, and that was to fight to the death. "I agree." Wu Jianxian coldly spat out these two words. Seconded, 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 seconded. All of a sudden, the entire great hall of Cosmos God was filled with the sound of agreement. The word "fight to the death" shot up to the heavens and shook the 9 continents. Cosmos God took a deep breath and looked at the Supremes in the hall. He nodded slightly in his heart. As long as the morale was still there, all obstacles were just waiting for them. "I'll fight force with force, and accompany you to the end," an invincible Supreme expert said, his eyes surging with battle intent. "That's right, if you want to fight, then fight. At most, you'll die. As cultivators, why should we hesitate to fight? When the yin and yang are in chaos, I will dye the sky with my divine blood." The other invincible Supremes also spoke out. To be able to cultivate to this realm, which one of them was not a dragon or phoenix among men, an existence that ruled over all ages, life and death had long been disregarded by them. From the moment they stepped into the off-world battleground, they did not even care about their own lives. Only the dragon, phoenix, and Chilan races remained silent and avoided the gaze of Cosmos God. Cosmos God could only pretend not to see this. "All right, everyone. In that case, all of you should go back and recuperate and prepare yourselves while waiting for the great battle to begin." The eyes of Cosmos God flickered as he spoke in a deep voice. In this battle, the people from the Void Universe suffered heavy injuries, but the people from the Divine Power Universe were also injured. They had to make full use of their time and maintain their peak condition. Yes, the crowd dispersed, and the hall returned to silence. Cosmos God's straight back relaxed and he sighed softly. He no longer concealed the fatigue between his brows. He had been far, far too tired after defending for 100,000 chaos cycles. Rubbing the space between his brows, Cosmos God turned to Lon Lon and said, "Little Lon, go to the depths of the universe again on my behalf and summon all the invincible Supremes who are still in the depths of the universe to the off-world battlefield." "All right." Lon Lon did not waste any time. After nodding in agreement, she walked out of the hall, released a cosmic boat, and shot into the depths of the universe. After Lon Lon left, only Cosmos God and Lan Su were left in the Great Hall. "Master, if all of the invincible Supremes are transferred here, I'm afraid that without the suppression of the invincible Supremes in the depths of the universe, there will inevitably be people who will take advantage of this opportunity to wreak havoc in the world," Lan Su said worriedly. Hearing this, Cosmos God frowned and glanced at Lan Su. Desperate times call for desperate measures. At this point, if we can't hold this battle, the entire divine power universe will be destroyed. There's no need to worry about anything else. Pausing for a moment, Cosmos God continued, "If anyone dares to cause trouble at this time and we lose this battle, naturally we can forget about this. If we win, this old man will go and settle the score." "Yes, I understand." Lan Su nodded in a daze. "Yes, you can leave too. Let me be alone." Cosmos God waved his hand and dismissed Lan Su. He first looked down at the torn sleeve on his right hand, then looked up at the sky. His gaze seemed to penetrate the roof of the hall and looked at the endless starry sky. He sighed softly. The thing that made his heart sink the most happened because he could no longer suppress Void God after the battle. "I have to let the others grow up quickly." Reigning in his thoughts, the eyes of Cosmos God flashed with a look of enlightenment. At the same time, in the depths of the starry sky, a giant black turtle the size of an entire star field was swimming back and forth. Some space pirates and cultivators who were passing by were shocked when they saw the giant turtle. They quickly moved away and did not dare to block the way. This is a fucking turtle? This turtle head is bigger than a planet. Let's go, let's go. It must be some old monster. The cultivators and space pirates all exclaimed in amazement. On the turtle's back, no one could hear the excited screams of a young girl. Wow, 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 master. So this is the depths of the universe? This is too beautiful. Wow. Auho. Auwu. The young girl was none other than the young girl who had met Jian Wushuang once at the Southern Ocean Island. During this period of time, she traveled the entire universe with Fengtian Patriarch and finally arrived at the depths of the universe, which was also the most prosperous area in the universe. Chu Ji's eyes glowed as she looked at the countless galaxies orbiting in front of her. Countless galaxies were drawn horizontally, and countless races were shuttling back and forth in the universe. In the past, when she was at the Southern Ocean Immortal Island, the starry sky she saw was only so big. She thought that the starry sky was really only so big. It was only at this moment that she realized that the starry sky in the universe was so bright and beautiful. It was a beauty that she had never imagined. Calm down, Chu Ji. Calm down. Just as Chu Ji was making a big fuss, her head suddenly exploded. She could not help but hold her head in pain and grimace. Master, why did you hit me? The child opened its big bright eyes and looked at Patriarch Fengtian with a wronged expression. Don't act like you're being wronged. Fengtian Patriarch blew at his beard and glared at the girl. He then said with a look of disdain, My dear disciple, your master, I am a respected figure in the universe. You've made yourself look like you've never seen the world before. It's embarrassing for your master. Oh, Chu Yang's O was dragged out, making the meaning of the O sound a little awkward. Master, I haven't seen anyone greet you along the way. They're all very respectful. Chu Ji mumbled softly. What are you saying? Upon hearing this, Fengtian Patriarch was instantly infuriated. He snorted coldly and said, When I dominated the universe back then, the depths of the universe were still in chaos. It's normal for these little guys to not recognize me. When Chu Ji heard this, she could not help but stick out her tongue playfully. All right, I can't be bothered to talk to you about this. After a pause, the expression of the Fengtian Patriarch gradually became solemn. He said in a deep voice, Disciple, I'm leaving. Leaving. Chu Ji was stunned when she heard this, but her eyes immediately lit up with excitement as she nodded with a smile. Sure. When are we leaving? Fengtian Patriarch took a deep breath and shook his head. Disciple, it's not us. I'm the one who will be leaving alone. Ha! Chu Ji was stunned when she heard this, and her face revealed a confused expression. Ever since she was an infant and had learned how to speak, she had been by the side of the Fengtian Patriarch. She had never thought that her master would leave her one day. She did not know why, but she suddenly felt as if all her strength had been sucked out of her. Her feet became lighter and heavier, as if she was stepping on clouds. It also felt as if a large stone was blocking her chest, causing her breathing to become somewhat sluggish. The atmosphere fell into an unprecedented silence. After a long while, Chu Ji forced a smile on her face and asked, Master, where are you going? Fengtian Patriarch noticed the expression on her young face, and a hint of pity appeared in his eyes. If it was possible, why would he want to leave this child? This silly disciple of his was so innocent and pure. If he was no longer around, who would protect her? She would definitely be deceived, right? In the long years, the old and the young had already depended on each other and became an unbreakable bond. However, in the next moment, the heartache in the eyes of the Fengtian Patriarch was replaced by determination. He turned his head and no longer looked at Chu Ji. He looked toward the distant battlefield and tried to calm his voice. I'm going to a place where I should be. Chu Ji fell silent once again. She knew that he had to go and make up for his regrets. Her master did not participate in the last great catastrophe war, and the entire universe was covered in corpses. Although Fengtian Patriarch rarely spoke about this, Chu Ji knew that her master had always been brooding over the fact that he had not helped the universe. And now, the great catastrophe war had broken out once more. It was time for her master to complete his mission. Okay. Chu Ji's face squeezed out a brilliant smile, and her eyes turned into crescent moons. Master, the sooner you leave, the sooner you return. I'm still waiting for you to accompany me to continue touring the universe. Haha. I hope that the next time I see you, you'll have found someone who's willing to accompany you through the sea of stars and not this old man. Reaching out to stroke her young hair affectionately, the Fengtian patriarch heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, this disciple of his was not completely unable to accept his departure, and her emotions were still relatively stable. With that, he could rest assured. However, he had forgotten that Chu Ji had always been a very sensible girl. Disciple, I'll be leaving then. The next time I see you, if your cultivation level doesn't improve, I'll punish you. I'm off, Fengtian patriarch said with a smile. Without any hesitation, he left a sensing mark on Chu Ji's body. Then he took a step forward and turned into a beam of light, flying into the distance. With a single jump, he crossed hundreds of millions of miles, crossing countless galaxies and stars. His speed was extremely fast, and in a short moment he disappeared into the depths of the universe. Off-world battlefield, main camp. All the supreme martial artists went into seclusion to recuperate, and the entire off-world battlefield was silent. However, everyone knew that this was just a sign of the coming storm. What about the Great Hall of Cosmos God? Cosmos God sat on the main seat and massaged his glabella. He had not taken a break for the past few days as he continued to refine supreme treasures and divine medicines. He hoped that he would be able to give these supremes of the divine power universe a helping hand. Master, these are the tea leaves from the Jilung Mountain in the bright sun star field. I picked them some time ago. They can help you rest in peace. Please try them. Lan Su carried a ceramic glazed teacup with both hands and walked over respectfully. A hint of tea fragrance mixed with steam rose from the teacup. However, what was surprising was that after the hot air rose, it did not dissipate, but turned into the appearance of a small qilin. The Nine Gods tea tree is guarded by the Tianji clan at Jilung Mountain. You're really kind to be able to get these tea leaves from them. Cosmos God smiled and took a sip of tea from the teacup. He was slightly pleased. Master's words are too serious. This is all disciples' duty. Lan Su replied with a smile. After drinking a mouthful of tea, Cosmos God felt his mood improve slightly. Seeing this, Lan Su had an idea and asked, Master, how confident do you think we are in winning this battle? I'm afraid it's not even 30%. Cosmos God replied after some thought. Is that so? Lan Su nodded as a thoughtful look flashed across his eyes. He then used a probing tone and said softly, Master, you've already been standing guard here for 100,000 chaos cycles. I mean, if the divine power universe is really broken, do you still want to die with it? As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere suddenly became strangely quiet. Cosmos God put down his teacup, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Lan Su expressionlessly and slowly said, What do you mean by that? Lan Su's heart trembled when he heard this. Master, He opened his mouth a few times as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he seemed to have thought of something. He gritted his teeth and raised his head to look at Cosmos God. He said in a deep voice, Master, other than Void God, Snake God isn't weak in the Void universe, and they seem to have the Devourer's support. If I may be so bold as to say this, the divine power universe doesn't have much chance of survival. Instead of being buried with the divine power universe, Master, you might as well discuss with Void God and see if you can rule the divine power universe by drawing stars. With your strength, as long as you talk with Void God, I'm sure he won't be brainless. He'll definitely be happy to form an alliance with you. Bastard! Without waiting for Lan Su to finish his sentence, Cosmos God had already sent out a palm and slapped Lan Su's face ruthlessly. Lan Su, are you asking me to give up the entire universe for the sake of my own life and death, regardless of the billions of lives in it? Bang! The slap sent Lan Su flying, and a huge pit appeared on the ground. This disciple, Lan Su turned over and stood up. He quickly knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing. His forehead shook the floor until it made a muffled sound. This disciple doesn't dare. Upon hearing this, the expression of Cosmos God turned extremely ugly. He berated sternly, "Get out of here! If Master hears your treasonous words again, don't blame Master for ending your life without considering the master-disciple relationship." He did not notice that when Lan Su, who had buried his face deep in the ground, heard this, a hint of resentment appeared on his face. This disciple knows his mistake. Lan Su squeezed out these words from between his teeth. "Why aren't you getting lost?" Cosmos God shouted out once more. "Yes." Lan Su stood up and left respectfully. However, no one noticed that his gaze had stopped on the teacup beside Cosmos God for an instant. A look of pain and pleasure appeared on his face. "Master, I don't want to be buried with the divine power universe. Since you're so stubborn and can't tell right from wrong, then don't blame me for taking the initiative." Lan Su muttered to himself and left Cosmos God Great Hall with large strides. Within the Great Hall, only Cosmos God was left. He kept breathing in and out to adjust his emotions, but his face was still ashen, and his anger had not subsided. Other than anger, he felt even more heartache. He had never thought that the disciple he had brought up would say such treacherous words. Off-world battlefield, main camp, Team 7. In a palace, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged on a futon with his eyes closed and his brows furrowed. The battle between the divine power universe and the void universe had reached the most critical stage. It was almost foreseeable that when the void universe came back again, it would strike like a thunderbolt. It was bound to have a life-or-death battle with the divine power universe. The divine power universe had already come up with a plan to deal with this. There was no other choice but to fight to the death. Therefore, Jian Wushuang should not have any other thoughts. He only needed to improve his power quietly and wait for the two universes to fight again. However, Jian Wushuang had been feeling uneasy these days. He knew the reason. That was because when he was at the God Refining Sect, Ban Shan had mentioned the word spy to him. There were spies in the divine power universe, and this spy was hiding in the base. Jian Wushuang had thought that the spy hiding among the higher-ups of the divine power universe would reveal himself after the great battle. However, the first great battle had already ended, and the infiltrator had not revealed anything. This made Jian Wushuang's heart sink. This lurker was probably up to something big. Chaotic world. Shaking his head, Jian Wushuang stopped thinking about it and started to improve his cultivation. As time gradually passed, more and more invincible supremes arrived at the off-world battlefield. The patriarchs of the top forces had all been in deep sleep, but for this battle, they had all woken up from their long sleep. They had come to the off-world battlefield despite the danger. They had been the last trump card and foundation of the divine power universe, but now they had all come out. It could be said that the divine power universe was willing to pay any price for this battle. With the arrival of the Fengtian Patriarch, the entire off-world battlefield was finally in an uproar. Fengtian Patriarch. Back then, he was in existence on the same level as Lord Cosmos God. I can't believe that the Fengtian Patriarch has finally reappeared after 100,000 chaos cycles. Back then, Fengtian Patriarch was in existence who could subdue the ancestral dragon. I just don't know why the Fengtian Patriarch's black tortoise didn't appear. With the Fengtian Patriarch here, what's there to worry about? Victory is ours. Countless old and experienced invincible supremes who knew of the Fengtian Patriarch stroked their beards and laughed heartily. Meanwhile, those who did not know the Fengtian Patriarch were overjoyed after hearing the story. Why were so many people so worried and hopeless about the battle between the divine power universe and the void universe and could only fight to the death? It was because beside void god, the snake god was also unbeatable. The snake god was an existence that had already taken that step. Although he had yet to reach the level of void god and cosmos god, he was only slightly weaker than them. This was what gave the divine power universe the biggest headache. This was because no one in the entire universe could keep the snake god in check. However, things were different now. The Fengtian Patriarch had arrived. The Fengtian Patriarch was a Xiantian life form born in the chaos. If the ancestral dragon, the phoenix ancestor, and the Qilin king were still alive, they would have to call him senior respectfully when they saw him. He was the same as the snake god. The only thing he was lacking from becoming as powerful as Cosmos God and Void God was a bit of luck. The Fengtian Patriarch was enough to turn the tide and change the outcome. Senior Fengtian. Senior Fengtian. Some of the invincible supremes who had dominated an era greeted the Fengtian Patriarch one after another. Even the Overlord Patriarch, White Ape, who had always been unruly and looked down on everyone, took the initiative to step forward and smile. Old brother Fengtian. Long time no see. Fengtian Patriarch looked at White Ape and nodded slightly. Then, he smiled and replied, White Ape, it seems like you're going to take that step and join our ranks. Hearing this, Overlord Patriarch waved his hand and replied with a bitter smile. This step seems simple, but it's not. Since ancient times, countless people have been stuck at this step. Fengtian Patriarch did not refute this. Indeed, people like the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace and Supreme Gaifu, who had used his life source to launch a brilliant attack, were all rare heroes and geniuses, but they were all stuck at this step. As for himself, if he wanted to take this step and reach the realm of Cosmos God, it would be even harder. Old brother Fengtian, do you want to go and meet Cosmos God first? White Ape changed the topic and asked with a smile. See him? Upon hearing the name of Cosmos God, the originally amiable and smiling old Fengtian Patriarch instantly turned unhappy. He huffed and said, Why are we meeting this old man? Let's go. Don't mention him. When Overlord Patriarch heard that, he could not help but rub his nose, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He did not expect that after so many years, the Fengtian Patriarch would still be brooding over this matter. However, he could understand. He smiled and said, Brother Fengtian, come with me. I'll find a place for you to settle down. All right. The expression on Fengtian Patriarch's face eased slightly, and he started chatting with Overlord Patriarch again with a smile. Meanwhile, in Cosmos God's hall, Cosmos God was also speechless when he found out that the Fengtian Patriarch had arrived but refused to meet him. This guy, after so many years, he's still as stubborn as ever. What a childish heart. Even though he said that, Cosmos God still felt more relaxed in his heart. He was well aware of the strength of the Fengtian Patriarch. He was definitely no weaker than Snake God, who had been at the height of his power for tens of thousands of chaos cycles. Although he might not be able to defeat Void God, he was confident that he could still trap Void God. That was enough. We might not lose this battle. Cosmos God narrowed his eyes, revealing a hint of battle intent. A month after the Fengtian Patriarch arrived at the off-world battlefield, the Void Universe had finally made a comeback. This time, the Void Universe had mobilized all its forces, gathering all the peak combat power of the entire Void Universe. They were mighty, blocking out the sun and occupying the entire starry sky. The pressure they exuded was enough to collapse the primordial era and shake the 9 heavens and 10 lands. The first to walk with his hands behind his back was Void God, who was shrouded in endless black mist and only revealed a pair of scarlet eyes. Closely behind him was a 9-headed serpent, and on the foreheads of the serpent were the symbols of the sun, moon, and other stars. This huge snake's strength was also extremely terrifying. With a slither of its body, it drew a pitch-black passage in the void. This person was Snake God from the Void Universe. Back then, Wang Lu, who had wanted to seize control of Jian Wushuang's divine body, was the junior of Snake God. Snake God. He was an important figure in the Void Universe. Ever since the battle between Void God and Cosmos God and the Snake God fell into a deep sleep, the Snake God had risen to power and took over as the leader, becoming the new overlord of the Void Universe. Compared to Void God, Snake God's strength was far inferior. However, this did not mean that he was weak. Snake God's strength was on par with Fengtian Patriarch. He had already taken that step and was in between Sixgar and Void God's level. The reason why he had not reached Void God's cultivation realm was that he lacked some fate energy. Behind Void God and the Snake God were the two Void emissaries on the left and right. These two were the peak existences among the 6 Scar Void Masters. After that, they walked out together. Each of them had different appearances and auras, but they were all extremely powerful Void Masters of the 6 Scar level. The third Patriarch of Sky Glory Sect, the Sect Master of the God Refining Sect, and the Palace Master of the Darkeen Palace, the second batch of 6 Scar Void Masters that had been left in the Void Universe, were also summoned by Void God and mobilized. When they stood together, their combined aura shot up into the sky, giving people an extremely powerful visual impact. Behind them was the army of ordinary Void Masters. They were also the largest in number, filling the entire sky and blocking out the sun. No one dared to look at them. The most terrifying thing was that in the void not far away from them, there were faint fluctuations and 7 figures in black robes were revealed. That was the Devourers. At this moment, when they were united, it could be said that this force was enough to destroy the heavens and earth, rush up to the 9 heavens and blue skies, and shake the 9 netherworlds. It was indescribably terrifying. At the same time, in the base of the off-world battlefield, ring! A sharp alarm suddenly exploded in the sky. Everyone who was in their respective chambers opened their eyes almost at the same time. The next moment, the low voice of Cosmos God rang out in their minds. The final battle has begun. Gather quickly. Rumble. Team 7. Jian Wushuang's bedroom. It's finally starting. The divine light in Jian Wushuang's eyes grew by 3 inches, and his whole body was filled with a sharp aura. Then, Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, picked up the Tarot Divine Sword, and put it back into the scabbard at his waist. He stood up. Then let's start. Bang! Jian Wushuang took a step forward and disappeared from the bedchamber. When Jian Wushuang walked to the main hall of the base camp, the spacious hall was already filled with people. Seeing Jian Wushuang coming, these ordinary supreme experts looked at him with respect and took the initiative to make way for him. Without realizing it, Jian Wushuang had already conquered everyone. He was unbeatable below the invincible supreme, but he was also a formidable leader of the supreme experts. The word leader was extremely heavy. Jian Wushuang walked closer and nodded at the supreme experts in response. Some of the invincible supremes turned around to look at Jian Wushuang with admiration in their eyes. Long time no see, little guy. The Overlord Patriarch smiled at Jian Wushuang. Senior White Ape. Jian Wushuang also smiled at Overlord Patriarch. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's shoulder was patted heavily by someone and a loud voice was heard. Ha 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 ha, little chicken. I see you again. The corner of Jian Wushuang's mouth twitched. He turned around and saw Patriarch Fengtian looking at him with a smile. Senior Fengtian. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and cupped his hands at Patriarch Fengtian. Hee, little guy. I finally get to see you. I forgot to ask you last time. What's your name again? Patriarch Fengtian stroked his beard and smiled. Senior Fengtian, I am Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang replied honestly. Jian Wushuang? This old man is somewhat familiar with this name. When I was traveling the universe recently, I seem to have heard people mention you. You're the #1 genius of this era in our universe, right? Patriarch Fengtian sized up Jian Wushuang and said with interest. Junior doesn't dare to accept such an honor. Jian Wushuang shook his head. Just as Patriarch Fengtian was about to say something else, a figure with white hair and a white beard walked out from the depths of the hall. Seeing the appearance of Cosmos God, Patriarch Fengtian's face fell. He snorted coldly and turned his head away, not saying another word. As for the others, they were also making slanderous remarks. They looked straight at Cosmos God and their expressions became solemn. Cosmos God was expressionless as he swept his gaze across everyone's faces. He did not say anything unnecessary and merely said four simple words. Follow me to battle. Yes. All the people in the area responded, their voices reaching the sky and shaking the 9 heavens. Of course, that was excluding the Patriarch Fengtian. It's quite like that. It's all gaudy. He pouted slightly. Cosmos God did not care about him. He stomped on the ground and turned into a stream of light, flying toward the direction of the off-world battlefield. Boom! 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 A series of muffled sounds rang out, and everyone followed closely behind. Less than 10,000 miles away from their base camp, the people from the Divine Power Universe and the Void Universe met in the starry sky. Cosmos God stopped in his tracks, and so did everyone else. The two sides stood facing each other. Although they did not say anything, a shocking battle intent was already emitted from the two sides. Swords drawn and bows drawn, ready to fire at a touch. You won't be able to stop us this time around, Cosmos God. Void God said indifferently with his hands behind his back. The black mist that surrounded him was like a tidal wave crashing against the shore. It continuously dispersed and surged. Is that so? Cosmos God was expressionless. You're so stubborn. Void God shook his head and continued. Cosmos God, our fight is nothing more than a fight for the fate of this universe. If you are willing to dissipate your cultivation, die under this starry sky. This seat can promise that I will not touch a single blade of grass or tree in your universe. This sentence immediately pushed Cosmos God to the opposite side of the universe with divine power. Fortunately, there was no change in the expression of Cosmos God. The supreme experts behind Cosmos God also had no expression on their faces. Those who could become supreme martial artists were all determined people. How could they be fooled by a few words? With Cosmos God, the Divine Power Universe still had a chance to turn the tables. Once Cosmos God died, the entire Divine Power Universe would become a piece of meat on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered by Void God. Void God did not mind. He just sighed and waved his hand. Then let the slaughter end all of this. Whoosh! In an instant, dozens of six-scar Void Masters led a black mass of ordinary Void Masters and rushed out from behind Void God. They passed by Void God and rushed toward the people from the Divine Power Universe with vicious smiles. The battle had erupted. The black clouds pressed down on the city, and the armor light opened up to the sun. The entire sky was occupied by the dozens of six-scar Void Masters and ordinary Void Masters. Like locusts passing through, the aura they emitted directly shattered the void. Kill them all! Wu Jianxian's beautiful eyes turned cold as she said in a cold voice. As soon as she finished speaking, Wu Jianxian took the lead and charged out on his sword. She was like a sword god. With a sword in hand, she could kill all enemies in the world. Little girls shouldn't be dancing around with swords and spears. Come at me then. The first Sky Glory Patriarch of the Sky Glory Holy Land from the Void Universe laughed sinisterly. He pulled with his right hand and opened a secret realm. He dragged the Wu Jianxian in and began the duel. I wasn't satisfied last time. Let's do it again. The eyes the Overlord Patriarch, White Ape, flashed with a bright light. The fighting spirit in his body shook the 9 heavens. His boiling chi and blood were like the sun, and no one dared to look at him directly. He threw a punch, and it was as if he was pushing a golden carriage. The ancient heavenly court's war drum was sounded, and the punch was blasted toward the right emissary. The water of the great river comes from the heavens. The crazy alcoholic in his tattered robe shook his head and sighed. Instantly, an endless amount of innate sunflower water gushed out of the gourd and rushed toward the left void emissary like an upside-down heavenly river. In just a few short moments, everyone had found their opponents. Snake God, who was close behind Void God, stuck out his 9 heads at the same time and sized up the entire scene. In the next moment, all 9 pairs of eyes fell on Jian Wushuang at the same time. You have the smell of my junior on you. Snake God's voice was hoarse as he spoke in a cold voice. I suppose that little fellow, Wang Lu, died in your hands? As soon as he finished speaking, the head on the right opened its mouth slightly and gathered a lot of void power. A terrifying aura spread out from the mouth of the snake head. Just as Snake God was about to kill Jian Wushuang, suddenly, the middle snake's head was patted by someone from behind. When did this guy appear? Snake God narrowed his eyes and turned around, only to see Feng Tian Patriarch looking at him with a faint smile. He's also an existence that took that step? Since when did the divine power universe have such a powerful being? Snake God was slightly surprised. There was no news of the Fengtian patriarch in the information he had received. However, in just a moment, he came back to his senses and lightly spat out 2 words. Interesting. Is that so? Fengtian patriarch grinned and raised his palm again, slamming it down on Snake God's head. In this palm, it seemed as if countless great worlds were destroyed and chaos appeared. His power had reached the extreme. I'll show you something even more interesting. Bang! Just as the palm that resembled a chaotic deity was about to land on Snake God's head, Snake God's huge tail had already whipped through the void and slashed at Fengtian patriarch like a giant axe. In the distance, Jian Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief. Even though he was now the strongest person below the invincible supreme realm, there was still a huge gap between him and Snake God, who had already taken the step to ascend from the invincible supreme realm. Fortunately, Snake God was now entangled with Fengtian patriarch, and the various invincible supremes each had their own opponents. No one in the off-world battlefield could stop him. Kill! Jian Wushuang's expression was cold and his eyes were cold. Suddenly, he rode his sword and turned into a shocking sword light, rushing toward the vast army of Void Masters. Behind Jian Wushuang were 9th Culpa King, the Overlord Patriarch, Supreme Gongyang, Golden Crow Emperor, and many other top Supreme Realm martial artists. They immediately formed a sharp knife and ruthlessly stabbed into the army of Void Masters. Instantly, flames of war and smoke of wolves rose up, and killing ensued. Divine Corpse, come! On the side of the Void Universe, the leader of the ordinary Void Masters was none other than Elder Mi Feng of the God-refining sect. This time, the Void Universe had mobilized all its forces. Not only have they reinforced their numbers with 6 Scar Void Masters, but the number of ordinary Void Masters had also skyrocketed. From the God-refining sect alone, 3 5-Scar Void Masters Mi Feng, Chen Gu, and Lanyue had rushed to the battlefield. Elder Mi Feng waved his right hand, and a tall, armored divine corpse holding a saber walked out from the void behind him. He looked like a war god of the heavenly court. Elder Mi Feng roared and immediately attacked the tall divine corpse from the left and right. Slash! Jian Wushuang cut a 3-headed and 6-armed Void Master in half with his sword and then looked at Elder Mi Feng. Jian Wushuang could not help but sigh. All in all, during the time he had spent in the God-refining sect, Elder Mi Feng had left a good impression on him. If he had not been protected by Elder Mi Feng, Jian Wushuang would have died in the God-refining sect. Kill! Jian Wushuang, who was about to collide with Elder Mi Feng, turned his sword peak slightly, brushed past Elder Mi Feng, and slashed at the other Void Warrior. What? Elder Mi Feng could not help but be slightly stunned. He had seen Jian Wushuang's power and he had some guesses. Jian Wushuang must be one of the most powerful experts in the divine power universe. He was not confident in facing Jian Wushuang. Hence, when he saw Jian Wushuang charging at him, he had already made up his mind to fight to the death. He did not expect that Jian Wushuang would pass by him. What's going on? Elder Mi Feng was a little puzzled, but he did not suspect anything and continued to kill the others. I'm your opponent. At this moment, a deep and cold voice sounded in his ear. He turned his head slightly and saw a cold-looking young man with blood-red hair, black divine patterns all over his body, and blood-red moons in his eyes. This person was 9th Culpa King, who had become demonic. After becoming a demon, not only did 9th Culpa King's strength skyrocket, but his temperament also became colder. One thought divine kingdom, 9th Culpa King said coldly. On the other side, Jian Wushuang shook his head as he watched the scene. It was already praiseworthy enough that he did not initiate a fight with Elder Mi Feng. Naturally, he could not ask others to not be hostile to Elder Mi Feng and allow him to slaughter them as he pleased. Elder Mi Feng is in danger, Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. After 9th Culpa King became demonic, he broke through to the peak of the High Supreme Realm. In terms of strength, he was no longer much weaker than him. Forget it. Life and death are up to fate. Shaking his head, Jian Wushuang stopped thinking. He turned into a golden light and killed his way through the army of Void Masters. The war had already broken out. In the entire area, other than Void God and Cosmos God, everyone else was engaged in a battle. Void God, come. Let this battle settle everything. The white hair of Cosmos God fluttered in the wind as his eyes flickered with a brilliant light. However, Void God chuckled and said in a playful tone, Cosmos God, the human heart is a very complicated thing. Don't you think so? What? Cosmos God's eyes narrowed slightly, feeling a little puzzled. However, he did not think too much about it. He circulated his divine power and planned to fight the final battle with the Void Gods. However, at the next moment, the expression of Cosmos God changed drastically as disbelief filled his eyes. How did this happen? Cosmos God gasped in disbelief. Just now, when he was about to use his divine power, he found that the terrifying divine power in his body that could make the universe explode and restart chaos had become extremely slow. It was as if countless vengeful spirits were tearing at his divine body, which caused his strength to drop by at least half. Void God! Cosmos God took a deep breath and looked at Void God. His expression turned grave for the first time. Although he did not know why his body would have such a change, he was sure that it was Void God's doing. This battle was most likely dangerous. Cosmos God, don't look at me like that. I hate using such methods to deal with you. Void God shrugged and said with a faint smile. You only have yourself to blame for all of this. Even the people closest to you can't stand what you're doing and can see the trend. Upon hearing this, Cosmos God's expression did not change. However, his heart sank. Then, as if he had thought of something, he turned around and slowly said, It's you. Lan Su and Lan Lan were standing side by side in the void behind Cosmos God. Among them, the gaze of Cosmos God landed on Lan Su. Master. Seeing the gaze of Cosmos God, Lan Su subconsciously felt fear in his heart and took a step back. I didn't. Lan Su did not dare to meet the gaze of Cosmos God and said in a flustered manner, Master, what's wrong? Lan Lan was stunned and asked in confusion. Cosmos God did not reply to Lan Lan. Instead, he took in a deep breath and looked straight into Lan Su's eyes, which were constantly avoiding eye contact. He said in a low voice, Little Su, you have had a habit since you were young. When you lie, your eyes will look everywhere. So, please don't lie to Master. Come, tell me, were you bewitched by Void God and betrayed the divine power universe? Tell me and take responsibility. I won't blame you. Before Lan Su could reply, Void God laughed sarcastically as if he had heard something funny. Ha ha ha, Cosmos God. I didn't bewitch him. It was your disciple who came to the Void universe to find me and asked me to give him a drop of my seed of origin. As soon as he said that, Lan Lan, who was standing at the side, understood what had happened. As for the heart of Cosmos God, it had completely sunk. The seed of origin. The seed of origin required the accumulation of thousands of lifeblood essence in order to integrate with a life seed. It was extremely powerful. Once someone was planted with the seed of origin, it was equivalent to their life and death being controlled by the other person. This disciple of his was so ruthless. Junior sister, I'm doing this for everyone's good. Lan Su seemed to be overwhelmed by the gazes of Cosmos God and Lan Lan. He gritted his teeth and stepped out. He forced himself to raise his head and look straight at Cosmos God. Master, don't blame disciple for doing this. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being too stubborn. Why can't you see that our divine power universe is no longer a match for the Void universe? The Void universe has already unified the two universes. Rather than leaving corpses strewn all over the ground and wasting the lives of innocent people, why not make a wise decision and choose to surrender? Honored Master, your disciple will put it bluntly. Isn't the reason why you've organized everyone to resist the Void universe all for the sake of your position as Cosmos God? For your own fate energy? You know that once the divine power universe surrenders, you won't be able to fight alone. You won't be a match for Void God. But Master, your life is valuable, but aren't our lives valuable too? Why did you let everyone die with you for your own selfish desires? Master, you're too selfish. A series of words came out of Lan Su's mouth like a string of bullets. It was as if he had been suppressing these words for a long time, just to burst out at this moment. After saying these words, Lan Su seemed to have used up all of his energy. He placed his hands on his knees and panted slightly, but there was a hint of ferocity between his brows. Cosmos God looked at Lan Su in a daze. The seed of origin from Void God had already taken effect in his body. It was as if countless bugs were gnawing at his body. However, this heart-piercing pain could not overcome Lan Su's words. Lan Su's words were like a knife that stabbed into his heart, cutting it apart. Lan covered her mouth and looked at Lan Su in disbelief. Was this still his humble, gentle, and modest senior brother? At this moment, in Lan's eyes, Lan Su had turned into a deformed and twisted demon that was about to devour people. As for Lan Su, after resting for a moment, he took a deep breath and looked at Cosmos God again. His gaze became sincere as he said, Master, Lord Void God has already promised me that as long as you're willing to cut off your cultivation and disperse all your fate energy, he's willing to stop this battle and return peace to the two universes. Master, don't worry. I'll never forget the kindness of your upbringing. As long as you're willing to do so, I'll definitely let you take care of your old age and live in peace. After saying that, Lan Su looked at Cosmos God with a face full of anticipation. When Void God heard this, the mockery on his face became even more apparent. He turned his gaze slightly and looked at the Cosmic God with a faint smile. Your disciple is right. Cosmos God, as long as you are willing to do so, I will immediately stop this battle. How about it? Cosmos God did not reply. Instead, he looked at Lan Su in disappointment and shook his head. Lan Su, you are too naive. Do you really think that the war will stop just because I'm dead? I'm telling you, the billions of creatures in the entire Divine Power universe will become the slaves of the Void universe and be slaughtered. It will also cut off the cultivation path of the entire Divine Power universe. When that happens, it will be a real disaster. And do you really think you can still live? You won't be able to live. This time, Cosmos God called out Lan Su's name, and no longer addressed himself as his master. His meaning was obvious. Lan Su's body trembled when he heard this. He pursed his lips and said, No, it wouldn't be like that. Lord Void God promised me that he wouldn't do this. However, this time around, Cosmos God did not bother about him. Instead, he turned around and looked at Void God expressionlessly. A look of determination flashed in his eyes. Void God, you can't win. Oh? Is that so? Void God stood in the air, and the corners of his mouth slowly curled up. You're still so stubborn even at this point? Cosmos God did not reply. Instead, he took in a deep breath and said slowly, Ancestral technique, Chaos Awakening. Boom! In an instant, Cosmos God formed hand seals with both hands. His white hair and long beard fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were extremely sharp. Gusts of strong wind suddenly spread out from beneath the feet of Cosmos God. Immediately after, the entire universe rumbled. The sky collapsed and the earth cracked. The stars moved, the sun and moon changed, and the entire starry sky was boiling. An ancient aura from the chaos spread out and enveloped the entire universe as if it was going to return everything to chaos. The face of Cosmos God turned pale rapidly as his entire body trembled. However, there seemed to be two balls of fire burning in his eyes. That was the will to die. Countless people from the two universes who were fighting a bloody battle felt this extremely strong and terrifying aura that came from the primordial chaos. Their expressions changed drastically, and their hearts were filled with shock as they stared at Cosmos God. Jian Wushuang was also among them. When he saw the expressions of Cosmos God, Void God, Lan Su, and Lan, he instantly understood everything. Is Lan Su a spy? Jian Wushuang's heart sank. This was something he had never thought of. As for the spy, he had some guesses in his heart. He had thought about whether it would be the Dragon Clan, Great Void Divine Emperor, and even the captain of Team 9 in the off-world battlefield. The only thing he did not expect was that the spy was Lan Su. Jian Wushuang's face flashed with surprise and astonishment. This was simply too unbelievable. Lan Su was the disciple of Cosmos God. In this universe, his status was only second to that of a Cosmos God. He's really a bastard. Jian Wushuang let out a long breath. At the same time, he understood that since Lan Su had chosen to reveal his identity, he must have succeeded in his goal. Boom! 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 Explosions rang out continuously between heaven and earth as everything collapsed. Even time and space began to reverse, trying to annihilate everything and return everything to chaos. Yin-yang space-time reversal. What's going on? How did this happen? In an instant, countless people raised their heads in shock. Even the unparalleled Supremes who stood at the peak of their era could not hide the shock in their eyes. The technique of Cosmos God was simply too mighty. It was not wrong to say that it could split the heavens and earth apart. It was as if the God of creation had descended to the world and wanted to reshape the purity and turbidity of the heavens and earth. With his own power, he had suddenly pried open the entire universe. At this moment, time began to reverse. The divine light in Void God's eyes brightened and his face changed. Impossible! That was impossible. Even existences like us might have a slight chance of opening it, but we can't reverse the entire universe and forcefully reverse the laws of the universe. Void God, you're right. I can't reverse the entire universe, but I can open a space-time tunnel and seal you and me into the space-time turbulence. The corners of Cosmos God's mouth slowly pulled open, revealing a sinister smile. Today, he was already doomed to die. However, he could also use his rotten body to make a final contribution to the universe. You're crazy. Void God-man's expression changed. Without waiting for him to make a move, Cosmos God had already torn apart the void with his hands. The torn void was like a mirror, reflecting a corner of chaos. Come with me. Cosmos God let out a loud bellow as his eyes snapped open. His eyes were wide with fury. Rise! At the next moment, the corner of the chaos suddenly shot out a black and yellow light that sucked in Cosmos God and Void God. A flash of anger appeared in Void God's eyes, and he said coldly, Cosmos God, 10,000 years. This technique can trap me for 10,000 years at most. After 10,000 years, I will be able to return from the space-time turbulence. When the time comes, I'll exterminate the entire divine power universe. And you will die in this chaos. A cold and cruel voice came out of Void God's mouth. Cosmos God did not reply. Instead, just as he was about to be sucked into the space-time turbulence, he swept his gaze across the faces of everyone in the divine power universe and shouted in a deep voice. Everyone remember, as long as the flames of our divine power universe continue to burn and the inheritance continues, there will be a day when our divine power universe will welcome a new dawn. Pausing for a moment, Cosmos God turned to look at Fengtian Patriarch and said, Fengtian, you've fought with me for 100,000 chaos cycles, and you've held a grudge against me for 100,000 chaos cycles. I'm now going to apologize to you. You? Patriarch Fengtian clenched his fists and took a deep breath. He then shouted, Old man, you better stay alive. I want you to apologize to me in front of the entire universe. After all, he and Cosmos God came from the origin source and were once the closest and best friends. If he really bore a grudge against Cosmos God, why would he appear here at this moment? He would have long sought refuge with the Void Universe and wished for nothing more than to kill Cosmos God. At this moment, the life source of Cosmos God was getting weaker and weaker, and his death intent was getting stronger and stronger. All the unhappiness he felt in the past had long disappeared. Cosmos God chuckled. He could feel that Void God's seed of origin was already flaring up violently in his body. He could not hold on much longer. Fengtian, lead everyone to retreat and preserve the next generation. They are our hope for the future. In the end, Cosmos God took a look at Lan Lan and sighed softly. Then he looked at Jian Wushuang deeply. Jian Wushuang, I'll give you a great fortune. Take it. Boom. A ball of white light slowly squeezed out from the space between the eyebrows of Cosmos God. Then, it shot out and instantly entered Jian Wushuang's body. After doing all that, Cosmos God no longer hesitated. He followed closely behind Void God and entered the chaotic turbulence. He was going to use his life force to suppress Void God for 10,000 years in the chaos of the universe. But the torn sky was restored to peace. Before Jian Wushuang could take a closer look at what Cosmos God had given him at the last moment, he heard the nine-headed snake god's 9 heads uttering sorrowful sounds at the same time. Void universe, follow me and kill. Roar. In an instant, the people of the Void universe went into a frenzy again and charged toward the divine power universe. The expression of Feng Tian Patriarch, who was standing at the forefront, darkened. He was about to block the attack. All of a sudden, a black beam of light as thick as an arm shot out from the void and pierced through the shoulder of Feng Tian Patriarch. Then 7 black-robed men slowly walked out of the void in a row. The first one was a thin figure with a red mask that only revealed his right eye. Devour 1. From now on, the Devourers will officially take over this war. Devour 1's indifferent voice spread out. When Fenjitan Patriarch looked up at Devour 1, his pupils shrank, and his face turned serious for the first time. Everyone, prepare to escape. The deep voice of the Feng Tian Patriarch rang out in everyone's minds. Devourers, I don't think it's a good idea for you to come out and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. Snake God's expression also changed slightly as he said, Do you not understand what I'm saying? Devour 1 looked at the Snake God. The next moment, Devour 1 raised his hand and gestured aggressively at the Snake God's 9 heads. Bang! Devour 1's slap was far away from Snake God, but it seemed to fold the void and hit Snake God's 9 heads. Suddenly, the 9 heads of Snake God shook, and a red handprint of 5 fingers appeared. Devour 1, you're courting death. In an instant, Snake God was enraged. His face was ashen to the extreme, and his entire body erupted with violent killing intent. The area within 1,000 feet of Snake God seemed to have turned into 1,000 feet of glaciers. The cold killing intent was like a raging sea, crashing against the shore, wave after wave, rising and falling continuously. Devour 1 was only in the same realm as him, and yet he dared to humiliate him like this. However, just as Snake God was about to lose his temper, Devour 1 turned over his right hand, and a diamond-shaped token with a huge word Devour on it appeared in his hand. With a calm expression, Devour 1 looked at Snake God, who was about to go crazy, and said indifferently, Snake God, I'm acting on the orders of the Lord Devouring Emperor. Are you sure you want to stop me? Do you want to be the Devourer's enemy? As soon as he said this, Snake God, who was about to use his killing move, suddenly stopped. His pupils shrank and his expression became uncertain. Devouring Emperor. This name was definitely a nightmarish existence in the Void universe. Snake God was not afraid of Devour 1. He did not even care about the Devourers. However, he really did not know the Devouring Emperor's background, so he did not dare to act rashly. Even Void God, who had taken that step, did not mention anything about Devouring Emperor. Therefore, it was highly possible that Devouring Emperor had taken that step as well. After a moment of silence, Snake God took a deep breath and let out a cold snort. He turned his head away and no longer spoke. It was obvious that he had given in. Seeing this, the people behind Devour 1 all showed mocking expressions. Devour 1 no longer looked at Snake God. Instead, he turned to look at Feng Tian Patriarch and said calmly, Your name is Feng Tian, right? His Majesty has ordered that if you are willing to give up, he is willing to accept you into his organization. After a pause, Devour 1 continued, Feng Tian, if you join Devourers, we can help you get out of the constraints of the universe's fate energy. You can take that step. As soon as he said this, not only did Feng Tian Patriarch's expression change, but even Snake God turned his head abruptly and looked at Devour 1's masked face with shock in his eyes. At their level, they naturally knew how difficult it was to truly take that step. Otherwise, it would not be the case where since the birth of both universes, Only Void God and Cosmos Gods were at that level. This was too outrageous. When the supreme experts from the Divine Power universe heard this, they immediately focused their eyes on Fengtian Patriarch's face, and a touch of despair appeared on their faces. Now that Cosmos God was no longer around, the person with the highest cultivation base here was none other than the Fengtian Patriarch. If even the Fengtian Patriarch chose to side with them, they would lose all ability to resist. Hearing that, Fengtian Patriarch narrowed his eyes and looked at Devour One. The corners of his mouth slowly cracked open, revealing a smile. Get the fuck here. Hearing that, Devour One did not get angry or furious, but sighed slightly. What a pity, Devour One said indifferently. Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive in the Divine Power universe. Yes. All of a sudden, the 6 members of Devourers walked out from behind Devour One. Laughing, they twisted their necks with cruel smiles on their faces. I can finally make my move. I've been holding back for too long. A meatball-like man from the Devourers said gloomily. I'll eat you all. The other strange man with mouths all over his body licked the corner of his mouth with greed in his eyes. Once again, Devour One looked at Snake God with his hands behind his back and ordered, You and the Void Universe, attack as well. Devour One, are you ordering me around? I'm telling you, you're still too young. Snake God laughed in anger. Before he could finish, Devour One interrupted him coldly. After that, I'll report to Devouring Emperor and ask him to let you join his organization. Fine. Snake God took a deep look at Devour One and said, Devour One, remember what you said. After saying that, Snake God's eyes swept across the faces of the Void Masters in the Void Universe. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes as he spat out 3 words. Follow me and kill them. Whoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, Snake God's body shuttled back and forth. All 9 of his heads opened up at the same time and bit down on Fengtian Patriarch. Kill! Bastards from the Divine Power universe. Die! Ha 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 ha! Kill them all! Countless Void Masters laughed and followed Snake God. Upon seeing this, not only did Fengtian Patriarch not back down, but the battle intent in his eyes also soared. He stroked his beard and laughed. If you want to conquer the Divine Power universe, you're not good enough. Boom! Fengtian Patriarch waved his hand behind him, creating a long gully that was hundreds of millions of feet long. He said to Jian Wushuang and the others, You guys retreat. Remember, as long as our Divine Power universe continues to burn and pass on, there will be a ray of light in the future. As soon as he finished speaking, he no longer hesitated. He burned his life force and rushed toward the Devourers, Snake God, and the people in the Void universe. This time, the aura of the Fengtian Patriarch rose sharply. I am Fengtian, and I'm here to die today. Taking a step forward, the Fengtian Patriarch broke through the shackles and his aura skyrocketed once more. He was now only a step away from being the same level as Cosmos God. The pupils of Snake God and the members of the Devourers all shrank in fear. Quickly retreat. This person is going all out. Retreat first. He can't hold on for long. Instantly, the countless Void Warriors who were charging at the Fengtian Patriarch seemed to have stepped on the brakes. Their expressions changed drastically, and they retreated. Fengtian Patriarch. On the side of the Divine Power universe, countless people saw this scene and were instantly enraged. No! Countless people wanted to rush over and help the Fengtian Patriarch. However, the Fengtian Patriarch seemed to have anticipated this and created countless chasms earlier. It was like an invisible glass that blocked all of them, preventing them from moving an inch forward. When Fengtian Patriarch saw this, he turned around and shouted with a cold expression, Don't you understand what I'm saying? Hurry up and run. Keep your lives. You are our hope. As soon as he said that, countless people were heartbroken. They looked at the Void Masters with eyes full of endless hatred. Let's retreat. At that moment, Overlord Patriarch let out a long sigh. Don't let the sacrifice of the Fengtian Patriarch and Lord Cosmos God go to waste. We can only have a future if we live. One day, we will be able to make a comeback. The battlefield outside the domain was filled with sorrow. First was Supreme Gai Fu, who launched a dazzling attack after sacrificing himself, striking fear in the hearts of the enemy. Later on, it was Cosmos Gods. In order to ensure that the divine power universe would not be extinguished and that the next generation would be preserved, he unleashed the primordial chaos and suppressed void gods for 10,000 years. And now, Fengtian Patriarch had burned his life source and turned it into a wall, allowing the divine power universe a way out in the face of thousands of tribulations. Many of their predecessors had fallen at the hands of the void universe for the sake of the divine power universe. Struggle, bitterness, resentment, sorrow, hatred, negative emotions filled the air, and even a new cup of wine tasted turbid. These seniors and martyrs will forever be respected. Let's go. The Overlord Patriarch sighed softly and said, Everyone, from now on, your life and death will be determined by the heavens. Protect yourself. When we wave the flag and gather the masses in the future, it will be the time for us to revive the divine power universe. After saying that, the Overlord Patriarch took a step forward and strode away. He did not value his life. He just knew that the divine power universe was doomed to lose. The only thing they could do now is to preserve what they have left, and hope that they could help the universe revive. We have been defeated. The sloppy Taoist, Immortal Hulu, poured a cup of wine from his gourd and poured it on the vast starry sky and land of divine power universe. This toast is for Gai Fu, Cosmos God, Fengtian Patriarch, and the billions of heroic spirits in my divine power universe. Then, he sighed and left. After the sloppy Taoist left, the Supremes gathered in the off-world battlefield side and began to disperse. Of course, there were also those who were willing to die and chose to stay on the battlefield to fight the void universe to the death. The divine power universe never lacked people who were brave and fierce. The captain of Team 7, Supreme Black Source, was one of the people who had stayed behind to fight to the death. You want to leave? Snake God's vertical pupils turned slightly, and he looked at the people of the divine power universe who had scattered and fled. The corners of her mouth gradually curled up into a cold smile. A bunch of loose sand. You want to escape? After saying that, Snake God shook his head. The 4 heads on the right side of the 9 heads suddenly chose to separate and break through the barrier drawn by Patriarch Fengtian. Then, it led the countless void warriors to hunt down the divine power universe. All right. Jian Wushuang nodded without hesitation. He was not a fool. He knew how important he was. He understood his own talent and potential. As long as he was given time to grow, he would be able to fully mature. Jian Wushuang was not afraid of death, but he did not want to die here. He still wanted to stay alive and take revenge for Supreme Gai Fu, for Cosmos God, for Fengtian Patriarch, and for the countless heroic spirits who had died in this battle. Trash from the divine power universe. Go to hell. A monster with no arms on the left but 6 arms on the right slashed at Jian Wushuang with 6 big sabers. A sword light flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. He did not even look at him, and the tarot divine sword in his hand was already out of the sheath. The 6-armed monster only felt a vast expanse of white flash past its eyes before its vision turned black and it lost consciousness. Swish! Blood and severed limbs fell from the sky like a rain of blood. Let's go. Jian Wushuang looked at 9th Culpa King. The 2 of them could be considered the most powerful fighting force of the Divine Life Palace. They had to return to the Divine Life Palace immediately and take them away. Just as the 2 of them were about to leave, Jian Wushuang stopped and looked at a dazed woman not far away. He said, Miss Lan Lan, are you leaving with us? All right. Lan Lan nodded in a daze. Her mind was still blank, and her thoughts were stuck at the moment when Cosmos God had left. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang sighed and said nothing. He waved his hand and put Lan Lan into the heaven-suppressing monument. Then Jian Wushuang and 9th Culpa King flew away. On the other side, why did it turn out like this? It should have ended in peace. Why did Master die? Lan Su's face was pale. He pursed his lips tightly and his body went weak. His original intention for instilling the seed of origin into Cosmos Gods was to let Cosmos Gods see the situation clearly and choose to surrender. By then, even if the fate of Cosmos Gods' cultivation bases were to dissipate, the divine power universe would be able to avoid a disaster and the war would end. Void God State had promised him that as long as his master was willing to give him the fate energy, he would retreat. The worst outcome would be that the divine power universe would become a subsidiary of the void universe. He had never expected that the divine power universe would fall to this point. Why? I just want to live. I want everyone to live. Is that wrong? Lan Su clenched his fists tightly and muttered to himself stubbornly. In her mind, she kept replaying the last look in the eyes of Cosmos God. It was unfamiliar and filled with disappointment. You're too naive. The words of the Cosmos God kept on ringing in his mind. Go to hell. Just as Lan Su was in a daze, a sinister laugh suddenly exploded above his head. Lan Su hurriedly looked up. A five-scar void master with a long halberd hacked down at him with a ferocious expression. Ah! In the universe, Lan Su's miserable cries could be heard. The halberd-wielding void master split Lan Su in half from his head to his waist. Then he grinned hideously and chased after another person. Jian Wushuang, who had already fled far away, turned around and saw this scene with an expressionless face. Idiot! Jian Wushuang and the ninth Culpa King took a step forward and turned into small black dots at the same time. They flew toward the distant starry sky at an extremely fast speed. Kill! A massacre began. Countless cultivators of the divine power universe who had chosen to fight to the death self-destructed one after another. They did not seek victory, but only to take away a few void masters of the void universe before they died. Supreme Black Source had slain 18 people in a row before self-detonating and dying. The unparalleled heroes of the divine power universe fell one after another. This day was destined to be the sorrowful day of the divine power universe. On this day, the heavens and earth trembled as if they had sensed something and let out a mighty sad song. In the void of the off-world battlefield, Devour One stood with his hands behind his back and watched Jian Wushuang leave. Hey, Devour One, aren't we going to catch this little guy? Devour Four said. A meaningful look flashed in Devour One's eyes when he heard that. He said with a faint smile, Don't worry, he can't escape. Let him run first. I'd like to see if Xianxia can still hide now that the balance between the two universes has been broken and one of the most important chess pieces has nowhere to go. Upon hearing that, Devour Four nodded. Everything they had done was for Xianxia. Cosmic Calendar, Chaos Cycle 6982. The divine power universe had fallen. Kill! The battlefield outside the domain was still filled with the sounds of killing. Countless supreme experts chose to fight to the death, and in the end, they fell one by one on the off-world battlefield. The massacre lasted for 3 days. 3 days later, the entire off-world battlefield was deathly silent. Only countless broken limbs remained floating in the air, as if silently recounting the tragedy of this battle. In the center of the off-world battlefield, an old man sat cross-legged with his clothes in tatters and his aura on the verge of dying. Countless corpses of the void universe were piled up around him. Among them, there were no less than 10 six-scar void masters, and even 3 devourer members had died here. There were even more void warriors around him, staring at the old man with fear. Although they knew that the old man was already at the end of his life, they still hesitated and did not dare to step forward. They had already been scared out of their wits by the Fengtian Patriarch. They had never seen someone who could fight against the entire universe by himself. During these 3 days, the Fengtian Patriarch had not taken half a step back, and they had not been able to advance a single foot. This was simply too shocking. During the last great catastrophe war, I hid for 100,000 chaos cycles, but in the end, I still can't calm my anger. Fengtian Patriarch sat cross-legged and looked around at the void masters in the void universe. He suddenly smiled. No one around them answered. They only held their weapons and looked at Fengtian Patriarch with fear. After he finished speaking, he raised his head and looked up at the endless starry sky. He seemed to be sighing. Speaking of which, those old friends of mine have all left. Even the old fogey, Cosmos God, has left this time around. I've fought with him for my entire life, and he's also been ahead of me for my entire life. I can't believe that he's still one step ahead of me in this last fight. With a bitter smile, Fengtian Patriarch lowered his head and no longer moved. After a long time, the Void Warriors beings with weapons in their hands slowly walked in. Die! A 5-scar Void Master, holding a long saber, mustered his courage and shouted with a ferocious expression. Then, the long saber stabbed into Fengtian Patriarch's body. Came out of his body, but not a drop of blood fell. He's dead. The demon is finally dead. Immediately, the 5-scar Void Master's face was filled with ecstasy. He pulled back his long saber and planned to completely destroy Fengtian Patriarch. Whoosh! At this moment, a black-robed figure with a red mask on his face stepped forward and appeared in front of the Fengtian Patriarch. With a flick of his finger, he sent the 5-scar Void Master flying with his saber. This man was Devour One. Then, Devour One mentioned that Fengtian Patriarch's life source had been exhausted, and his body had fallen. A proper burial, he said in a deep voice. A proper burial? 8 of Snake God's 9 heads had been blown off during the battle with the Fengtian Patriarch. He shrieked, Devour One, this man almost destroyed my Tao foundation and hurt my origin, and you want to bury him? Give me the corpse. I want to repeatedly crush and torture it. Only then can I vent the hatred in my heart. Since when have you made decisions for me? Devour One looked at him coldly and pushed his right hand forward. At that moment, the body of Fengtian Patriarch floated up on its own and rose all the way up until it finally disappeared into the universe. Born in the universe. Die in the universe. Rest in peace. Devour One shook his head and turned around, his eyes brutal and murderous again. Kill. Annihilate all the powers in the divine power universe and reshuffle the cards. Yes. As soon as he finished speaking, the remaining 4 members of Devourers and countless Void Warriors all knelt on one knee and agreed. In the process of fighting the Fengtian Patriarch, Devour One conquered everyone with his own strength. Whoosh! 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 Instantly, countless Void Masters flew up and flew toward the depths of the divine power universe. In the boundless starry sky of the divine power universe, the 3 divine lights were flying at high speed. They were Jian Wushuang, 9th Culpa King, and Lan Lan, who had escaped from the off-world battlefield. Jian Wushuang, what should we do next? After a period of recovery, Lan Lan's mood was a little better than before. Although she was still immersed in grief, she was not at the stage of not being able to tell what was going on. Now, Jian Wushuang was the only person who was on good terms with her. Naturally, he became her backbone. 9th Culpa King also asked, Jian Wushuang, now that the divine power universe is broken, I'm afraid it won't take long for the people from the void universe to attack us. And we are equivalent to the remnants of the divine power universe. They will never allow us to exist. Therefore, we have to make plans for the next step as soon as possible. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and nodded to show that he understood. He did not need to think to know that the divine power universe would face a great purge soon. All the forces would be killed, and all order would collapse. Even if there were forces that had not been killed, they would become the dogs and prisoners of the void universe. The divine power universe was going to be reshuffled and a new era would begin. The only way is to hide in one of the 9 forbidden zones. After thinking for a while, Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice, 9 forbidden zones? 9th Culpa King frowned upon hearing this. That's right. Jian Wushuang nodded and replied, the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans each occupy one of the 9 forbidden zones. Senior Overlord Patriarch occupies the Glacier Forbidden Land, the Deep Abyss, which is occupied by the descendants of the Dark Demon. The remaining 4 forbidden zones are more mysterious. Even an invincible Supreme might not be able to come out alive after entering them. There has been no news of the 4 forbidden zones for years. If we want to avoid this disaster, we can only hide in these forbidden zones. 9th Culpa King did not reply. Instead, He pondered for a long time before he said, Jian Wushuang, the danger of these forbidden zones is no less than the threat of the void universe. If we enter these 4 forbidden zones, I'm afraid we'll die. Jian Wushuang shook his head and replied, Now is not the time to weigh the pros and cons and make a decision. If it were just the 3 of us, we would be able to find a place to hide no matter how big the universe is. But don't forget that there are still tens of thousands of disciples waiting for us in the Divine Life Palace. Upon hearing this, Ninth Kulpa King was stunned and immediately stopped talking. As for Jian Wushuang, he turned around and looked in the direction of the Divine Life Palace. His eyes flickered as he said, Let's go back to the Divine Life Palace first. We must move everyone in the Divine Life Palace to the Forbidden Zones before the great army of the Void Universe reaches the depths of the universe. In the universe, Jian Wushuang, Ninth Kulpa King, and Lan Lan were flying in the direction of the Divine Life Palace. Along the way, many top forces had already learned that the Divine Universe had fallen. They packed up their belongings and fled to the remote areas of the universe. Only the sects and some mortals who lived at the bottom of the universe still did not know everything. They did not know that the world had changed. The entire universe was in chaos. Among them, many people took advantage of the situation. Many of the leaders of the various powers, the patriarchs of the various clans, and all the famous and influential figures in the past, had all turned into cosmic pirates at this moment. They plundered everything in their path in order to prepare for their secluded cultivation. Therefore, the road was filled with wails and the flames of war. When people were not bound by order, they were no different from wild beasts. Bang! Jian Wushuang slapped an intermediate supreme who was confused and wanted to rob the 3 of them, turning him into dust. Then he said, We have to speed up. I'm afraid many forces have the same plan as us and want to hide in the forbidden zones. Ninth Kulpa King nodded in agreement. The 3 of them did not waste any more time. They released their auras and flew toward the Divine Life Palace. Some of the supreme experts, who had wanted to take advantage of the situation, suppressed their palpitations and let the 3 of them leave when they sensed their auras and knew that they were Jian Wushuang and Ninth Kulpa King. A few months later, the 3 of them arrived at the Divine Life Palace in the depths of the universe. All in all, the deep part of the universe was still bustling. It was obvious that the news of the collapse of the Divine Power universe had not yet reached this place. The 2 disciples who were in charge of guarding the gate of the Divine Life Palace were chatting leisurely. When he saw Ninth Kulpa King and Jian Wushuang coming, he immediately shuddered and quickly stood up and said respectfully, Supreme Wushuang, Supreme Ninth Kulpa. Jian Wushuang nodded at him. Without wasting any time, he asked, Where are the Supreme Shui Bo and the others? Supreme Wushuang, Lord Shui Bo and the others are all in the Supreme Temple. Within the Supreme Temple, Supreme Shui Bo Supreme, Supreme Junfu, and Supreme Tianyi were discussing the current situation. Their tone was quite optimistic. Obviously, they did not know the news that the Divine Power universe had been broken. As soon as Jian Wushuang, Ninth Kulpa King, and Lan Lan stepped in, Supreme Tianyi, Junfu, and Shui Bo, who were facing the door, noticed the 3 of them. Jian Wushuang, Ninth Kulpa King? And a disciple of Lord Cosmos God? Why are you guys back? Supreme Tianyi asked, his brows twitching. At this time, shouldn't Jian Wushuang and the others be fighting in the off-world battlefield against the Void Universe? Could it be that they had already defeated the Void Universe? That's right. Why are the 3 of you the only ones who returned? Where's Supreme Gaifu? Supreme Junfu asked. Jian Wushuang and the other 2 did not reply. Instead, they lowered their heads and sighed as they looked at the 2 people's eyes that were filled with expectation and joy. He did not know how to tell the 3 of them this cruel news. Among the 3 of them, only Supreme Shui Bo noticed that Jian Wushuang and the other 2's expressions were somewhat abnormal. He gestured for Junfu and Tianyi to quiet down. Then, he took a deep breath and looked at Jian Wushuang and the other 2 seriously. He asked slowly, Jian Wushuang, did something happen on the off-world battlefield? You can speak your mind. All right. Jian Wushuang nodded. He was not an indecisive person. He knew that the news would spread to the depths of the universe sooner or later. The most important thing now was to evacuate. Supreme Shuebo, we lost. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered as he said this. As soon as he finished speaking, it was as if a stone had caused 1,000 ripples. Supreme Shuebo and the other two were shocked and could not believe their ears. What? We've been defeated. Supreme Junfu and Supreme Tianyi's expressions changed drastically, and their eyes were filled with shock. They had thought that even if the Divine Power Universe could not defeat the Void Universe in a short time, it could not have been defeated so quickly. Of the three, only the Shuebo chuckled wryly, not too surprised. When he saw the three of them appear here together, he had a bad feeling in his heart. He did not expect that it would be as he had expected. Then, where's Supreme Gaifu? Supreme Shuebo took 3 deep breaths in a row before he managed to suppress his emotions. Supreme Gaifu has fallen. He's not the only one who has fallen. Lord Cosmos God has also died on the off-world battlefield. Jian Wushuang replied again. It was as if another bombshell had been dropped in the minds of the 3 supreme experts. When Supreme Shuebo and the other two heard this, their legs turned to jelly and they almost fell to the ground. How is that possible? How did this happen? The faces of Supreme Shuebo and the other two were pale as if their blood had been sucked dry. They muttered in disbelief. They had never thought that someone as powerful as Lord Cosmos God would die one day. Doesn't that mean that the people of the Void Universe are about to attack? Supreme Shuebo raised his head, trembling, and looked at Jian Wushuang. That's correct. Jian Wushuang nodded and replied, Fengtian Patriarch used his life to delay the Void Universe. However, I'm afraid he won't be able to delay them for long. The people from the Void Universe will completely erode the Divine Power Universe in no time. As soon as he finished speaking, Supreme Shuebo and the other two were once again dazed. Fortunately, the 3 of them were not emotional people. After a short while, they regained their spirits. The past could not be traced back. The Divine Power Universe had already been destroyed, and Cosmos Gods and the others had died. What they should be thinking about next was what to do in the future. Supreme Shuebo, my suggestion is for the entire Divine Palace to move away from the depths of the universe and find another place. Jian Wushuang's eyes were burning as he spoke. Move? Find another place. Supreme Tianyi's brows twitched upon hearing this, but he shook his head in a resolute manner. No, I don't agree. This is the root of the Divine Life Palace, the place where I, Tianyi, was born. If you want to leave, you can leave. At worst, I'll die in the Divine Life Palace. It's just death. What do I have to fear? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but frown and said, Supreme Tianyi, this is a critical moment, a life and death situation. I hope you can consider the big picture. Jian Wushuang, I know you mean well. Unfortunately, the Divine Life Palace has done a great favor for me. I can't abandon it and leave. You can go. I'll stay here and send the Divine Life Palace on its last journey. I'm willing to be buried with the Divine Life Palace. Supreme Tianyi spoke resolutely. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but fall silent. The Supreme Temple was deathly silent. Jian Wushuang took a glance at Supreme Tianyi, then turned to look at Supreme Bloodwave and Supreme Junfu, only to find that the 2 of them were silent. Do you guys think so too? Jian Wushuang asked. Supreme Junfu did not say anything, but Supreme Bloodwave let out a bitter laugh and said, Jian Wushuang, you may not know our situation. The 3 of us have built the Divine Life Palace since we were young and weak. To us, the Divine Life Palace is not only a sect, but also our home. How can you ask us to do it, to abandon this family? Even mortals know how to protect their homes, fight for their homes, and die for their homes. How can we leave our homes? To abandon this place that raised me? Junfu and Tianyi both smiled bitterly and nodded. Foolish. However, this time Jian Wushuang, who had always been respectful to the Blood Wave Master and the others, interrupted them with an unexpected scolding. If you save the land and lose the people, you'll lose everything. If you save the people and lose the land, you can regain everything. Supreme Blood Wave, you're my seniors. so it's not appropriate for me to argue with you. However, I'm sorry, but you'll have to listen to me. You say that the Divine Life Palace is home because everyone in the Divine Life Palace exists. It is because of the existence of the disciples of the Divine Life Palace that it has been given a special meaning. Otherwise, it would just be a piece of land with some buildings. I, Jian Wushuang, don't understand any righteousness or great principles. I only know that we should give them a taste of their own medicine. The Void Universe has killed countless heroes of our Divine Power Universe. We have to stay alive and work hard to grow. Only then can we make the Void Universe pay for what it did and comfort the souls of the heroes who died in the off-world battlefield. Jian Wushuang's expression was cold as he spoke. Supreme Blood Wave and the other two exchanged looks upon hearing this. They had never thought that Jian Wushuang would talk to them in such a tone. In their impression, Jian Wushuang had always been a modest and gentle person. Jian Wushuang, it seems that you have really grown up. Supreme Blood Wave sighed. He was not angry. On the contrary, he felt somewhat gratified. This meant that Jian Wushuang already had his own opinion and ambition to take charge. Supreme Tianyi nodded and said, Jian Wushuang, I admit that you're right. However, I've already made up my mind. I've decided to live and die with the Divine Life Palace. You can take the other disciples and move. After taking a deep breath, Supreme Tianyi continued, Jian Wushuang, with your talent, I think you will definitely be able to lead the Divine Life Palace well. Who knows, he might be able to start a great cause again in the future. Take good care of yourself. Before he could finish, Jian Wushuang spoke again. Supreme Tianyi, do you think I'm discussing this with you? Whoosh! The next moment, a diamond-shaped black iron token appeared in Jian Wushuang's hand. Here is the Palace Master token. I, Jian Wushuang, am the second sect master of the Divine Life Palace. Bang! In an instant, regardless of whether it was Supreme Blood Wave, Supreme Junfu, the stubborn Supreme Tianyi, or even the ninth Culpa King who was a little further away, their eyes lit up when they saw the token and they immediately knelt on one knee. I, Blood Wave, pay my respects to the Palace Master. I, Tianyi, pay my respects to the Palace Master. I, Junfu, pay my respects to the Palace Master. I, Ninth Culpa, pay my respects to the Palace Master. Although they did not know where Jian Wushuang got the Palace Master's token, the Divine Life Palace had a rule that whoever held the token of the Divine Life Palace was the Palace Master. At the same time, they were overjoyed. Back then, the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had left with the Palace Master's token. After the disappearance of the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace, the token had never returned. And now, the token was in Jian Wushuang's hand. Did it mean that Jian Wushuang had met the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace? Blood Wave, Tianyi Junfu, hear my order. Jian Wushuang took a step forward and his eyes flickered. He said in a deep voice, I order the three of you to gather disciples for the Divine Life Palace. After that, you will leave the Divine Life Palace with me and find another place to rest and recuperate. Do you all disobey? As soon as he finished speaking, the Supreme Blood Wave, Supreme Tianyi, and the other two looked at each other. I wouldn't dare. The three of them lowered their heads and said, Good. Then let's get moving. Jian Wushuang waved his hand and a gentle force lifted the four men's knees from the ground. I'm sorry for offending you just now, Jian Wushuang said apologetically. This is the etiquette of meeting the Palace Master. How can you say that you've offended us? Supreme Blood Wave shook his head and paused for a moment before saying, Jian Wu, no, Palace Master? Is the previous Palace Master well? Without waiting for Jian Wushuang to reply, Blood Wave said to himself, Forget it, we'll talk about this later. I'll go and gather the others first. After saying this, Supreme Blood Wave strode away. Now that they had decided to move the entire palace, they had to make all the necessary preparations. Palace Master, I'll go too. Farewell. Supreme Junfu, Supreme Tianyi, Ninth Culpa King, and the others left one after another. In the blink of an eye, only Jian Wushuang and Lan Lan were left in the Supreme Temple. Jian Wushuang thought for a while and said, Miss Lon Lon, please wait here for a moment. I'll be back soon. Alright, go ahead. You don't need to worry about me. I'm sure your beloved wife has been waiting for you for a long time, Lon Lon said with a smile. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang was stunned. He immediately nodded and said, Yes, she's been waiting for me for a long, long time. After saying that, Jian Wushuang no longer hesitated. He took a heavy step and soared into the sky, heading toward the 6th mountain range of the Divine Life Palace. Whoosh! A streak of flowing light landed in the manor in the 6th mountain range and turned into Jian Wushuang, who was wearing a black robe. From a distance, Jian Wushuang saw a gentle woman sitting by the lakeside of the manor. She was throwing fish bait, which attracted the fish to fight for food. Hearing the noise, Lung Rushuang turned her head slightly and was stunned. Swish! The bait slipped from her hand like a thread, but Lung Rushuang looked at Jian Wushuang blankly, as if she didn't feel it. My husband. Husband! The next moment, Lung Rushuang ran toward Jian Wushuang and ran into his arms. She stretched out her hands and hugged Jian Wushuang, as if she wanted to merge Jian Wushuang into her body. Shuanger, I've let you suffer during this period of time. Jian Wushuang sighed and stroked Lung Rushuang's hair with his right hand to comfort her. The pretty girl in her arms was already teary-eyed and choked with tears. They had not seen each other for 10,000 years. Even when Jian Wushuang had returned from the Void Universe to the Southern Ocean Immortal Island, he had not entered her house and had not taken a look at her. Jian Wushuang had long felt guilty toward her. Husband, you're finally back. Lung Rushuang held Jian Wushuang so tightly that her nails dug into his back. She seemed to be afraid that Jian Wushuang would leave again if she let go. All right, Shuanger. Let your husband come and check how much your cultivation has improved during this time. Jian Wushuang smiled and gently patted Lung Rushuang's back, letting her go. Are you about to break through to the Supreme Realm? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and immediately praised. It seems that Shuanger has been working hard during this time. You're about to catch up to husband. Lung Rushuang forced a smile on her face, but her eyes were dim. She could feel that she was of less help to Jian Wushuang. Even though she had tried her best to improve her cultivation, the gap between her and Jian Wushuang was still getting bigger. She was afraid that if this continued, one day, the two of them would become people from two different worlds. Husband, are you leaving again after coming back this time? Lung Rushuang asked. I am. Jian Wushuang nodded and noticed that Lung Rushuang's expression had dimmed. He could not help but smile and say, But this time we'll be going together. Really? In an instant, Lung Rushuang's eyes glowed with joy and she looked at Jian Wushuang with anticipation. Of course. Jian Wushuang nodded and told Lung Rushuang what had happened on the off-world battlefield. Suddenly, Lung Rushuang was dazed. The two of them chatted for a while. At this time, 9th Kulpa King, who also lived in the 6th mountain range, flew over and said, Jian Palace Master, all the disciples have been gathered and are waiting for your instructions. Okay. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he took Lung Rushuang with him to the mountain gate. When they arrived at the mountain gate, over 10,000 disciples of the Divine Life Palace had already gathered. After 10,000 years of recuperation, the Divine Life Palace had been completely restored, and its strength was even slightly higher than before. It was showing signs of prosperity. If they continued to grow, they might become the #1 power in the Divine Power Universe. We pay our respects to Palace Master Wushuang. Seeing Jian Wushuang coming on a cloud, the disciples knelt and shouted in unison. Their voices reverberated through the clouds. Their faces were filled with solemnness. Good. Jian Wushuang nodded. Behind him stood the 4 top Supreme Masters, 9th Kulpa, Shuebo, Junfu, and Tianyi. Everyone, I think you already know that the Divine Power Universe has been defeated. Now, we have only one way out, which is to find another place and concentrate on developing. Do you have any objections? We will follow Palace Master Wushuang's orders. All the disciples of the Divine Life Palace responded. Good. Jian Wushuang nodded and turned to 9th Kulpa King. Supreme 9th Kulpa, please release all the cosmic boats in the storage of my Divine Life Palace and arrange for the disciples to board it. Yes. Ninth Culpa King nodded and turned around to prepare. Supreme Tianyi. Jian Wushuang looked at Supreme Tianyi. You are in charge of storing all the books, divine medicines, divine materials, weapons, and universe origin stones in the library pavilion into your interspatial ring. Yes. Palace Master. Tianyi nodded his head and transformed into a streak of light as well, heading straight for the library pavilion. Supreme Jun Fu. Jian Wushuang's gaze turned to Jun Fu again, and he sent out orders one after another. Immediately, the entire Divine Life Palace began to move quickly. Then, Jian Wushuang stepped forward and arrived at the River of Enlightenment. River Spirit. Jian Wushuang stood on the River of Enlightenment with his hands behind his back and shouted. In an instant, a short old man with a small mustache, who was no more than 3 feet tall, walked out of the River of Enlightenment. Goddamn Jian Wu! He saw Jian Wushuang and exclaimed. Before he could finish his sentence, Jian Wushuang glared at him and he stopped talking. He smiled embarrassedly and said, Supreme Wushuang, MMM. Jian Wushuang nodded. River Spirit should be the only person in the Divine Life Palace who did not know his identity and the news that the Divine Power Universe had been defeated. Pack your things and leave the Divine Life Palace with me. Leave the Divine Life Palace? River Spirit, who had been grinning, suddenly stared at Jian Wushuang with wide eyes. Then, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, he cried out, Jian Wushuang, you ungrateful thing, abusing your power for personal revenge. Do you think you're powerful now and want to take revenge on me? I'm telling you, even if I, Lord River Spirit, die here and the Divine Life Palace is destroyed, I won't leave. I want to live and die with the Divine Life Palace. These words were said with a strong sense of righteousness and justice. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang was so angry that he laughed. He flicked his sleeves and said, Then prepare to die here. Then Jian Wushuang was ready to leave. The River Spirit glanced at Jian Wushuang and snorted. Whoosh! At this moment, a disciple of the Divine Life Palace who had packed his bags flew over. He stopped when he saw the spirit of the River of Enlightenment. He landed and said in surprise, Lord River Spirit, you're still not ready to leave, are you? Leave? Why should I leave? River Spirit said disdainfully as it picked its nose and flicked a booger onto the ground. The disciple of the Divine Life Palace was even more surprised when he heard this, and he replied, Lord River Spirit, don't you know? The Divine Power Universe has already been defeated. The great beings of the Void Universe will come here soon. After saying that, the disciple did not say anything more. He took a step forward and immediately walked toward the square at the mountain gate. His senior brothers had already boarded the cosmic boat, so he could not delay any longer. What? The Divine Power Universe was defeated? The people from the Void Universe are about to attack. River Spirit stopped picking his nose stopped, and he was stunned. Immediately, his entire body shivered and he cried out, Mommy! Plop! The next moment, the River Spirit plunged into the River of Enlightenment. A few breaths later, the dwarf-like Lord River Spirit rushed out with a bag that looked like a pair of flower underpants on his back. Hey, the little guy in front! Wait for me! He shouted, panting. To hell with righteousness! 2 hours later, all the preparation work was completed. More than 10,000 disciples of the Divine Life Palace had already boarded the cosmic boat. Jian Wushuang could not help but let out a sigh of relief. In that case, there was only one last problem left. Palace Master, what should we do about Supreme Yen Shan? Shuebo stood behind Jian Wushuang and said in a low voice. Supreme Yen Shan's body had long since transformed into a mountain, taking root in the land of the Divine Life Palace and becoming one with it. Supreme Yen Shan. Jian Wushuang looked at the mountain in front of the Divine Life Palace and frowned. Supreme Yen Shan's body had long since been connected to the entire Divine Life Palace. He was like a huge tree that was deeply rooted in the ground. The ground beneath his feet was Supreme Yen Shan's chest, and the flowing river was his bloodline. He and the Divine Life Palace had long been inseparable. Palace Master, There's no need to consider my fate. On the huge mountain, Supreme Yen Shan's face appeared. He looked at Jian Wushuang and smiled. I've been unable to move during these years, but I've long since mastered a divine ability that can conceal my aura. As long as I don't reveal my aura, even an invincible Supreme won't be able to see through my true form. They'll only think that I'm an ordinary mountain. All of you just leave. Jian Wushuang was silent for a moment and then nodded. Regardless of whether what Supreme Yen Shan said was true or false, he could only treat it as the truth to comfort him. Now, he was no longer the pampered disciple. He had to carry the entire Divine Life Palace and be responsible for the tens of thousands of lives in the Divine Life Palace. He could not afford to be indecisive. A moment later, all the disciples boarded the cosmic boat, leaving only Jian Wushuang, Ninth Culpa King, and the other 3 lead Supreme Masters. At this moment, a muffled sound came from the direction of the Divine Life Palace's weapon-hiding pavilion, and the whole earth trembled. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and turned his head to look. He saw Supreme Tian-Yi pushing a huge dragon-head cannon out of the armament repository. This dragon-head cannon was 1,000 feet tall, and just the muzzle was the size of a pond. It reached into the clouds, and the black body of the cannon was covered with golden divine patterns. What is this? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and his face revealed a touch of surprise. He could actually feel a sense of danger from the dragon-head cannon. It had to be known that with his current strength, even some ordinary invincible Supremes would not be able to make him feel such a sense of danger. Palace Master, this is the Divine Life Palace's trump card, the Dragon God Cannon. It was refined from the skull of the ancestral dragon after its death. Although it can only launch one attack, it can kill an invincible Supreme. Supreme Tian-Yi said with a smile. Oh! Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and replied, why didn't we use this when the 6 forces invaded the Divine Life Palace? With a bitter smile, Supreme Shui Bo continued, secondly, we couldn't use the dragon-head cannon at that time. We had to use a special key to start it. Key? Jian Wushuang was surprised. That's right. Shui Bo nodded and pointed at the black iron token hanging on Jian Wushuang's waist, which represented his status as the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace. He said, Palace Master. The key is the Palace Master's token of the Divine Life Palace. When the previous Palace Master left and never returned, the Palace Master's token disappeared as well. This great killing weapon has been left in the weapon-hiding pavilion since then. I see. After that, Jian Wushuang used the Palace Master's token to unlock the Dragonhead Cannon and put it into his interspatial ring. At this point, the plan to relocate the Divine Life Palace had been completed. Rumble. With a series of engines rumbling, dozens of cosmic boats floated in the starry sky. They let out an angry roar and suddenly shot out, heading toward the extreme north of the universe. On the deck of the first cosmic boat, the wind was howling. Jian Wushuang stood silently with his hands behind his back. He turned around and looked in the direction of the Divine Life Palace. As the cosmic boat sped along, the Divine Life Palace became smaller and smaller until it was just a black dot. I'll definitely be back. Definitely. After taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang no longer hesitated. He turned around and no longer looked at the Divine Life Palace. Instead, his eyes flickered as he looked into the distance. 3 months passed by in a flash. In these 3 months, a large group of people from the Void Universe had finally killed their way into the depths of the Divine Power Universe. As they passed, they killed. The entire Divine Power Universe was engulfed in flames of war and smoke of war. The starry sky that used to be bright and beautiful was now dyed blood red. The cries for mercy, the screams, the roars, and the roars of madness that would not stop until one died became the melody of the universe. In a short 3 months, more than 100 sects of all sizes had fallen. There were tens of thousands of races in the universe, but all of them were exterminated by the Void Universe. They were completely exterminated and removed from the universe. Some top forces had been enslaved by the Void Universe and turned into puppets without self-consciousness, which could be controlled at will. At the same time, countless fierce battles broke out in the universe. In one of the divine kingdoms, from the ant-like mortals to the divine masters and the supreme realm experts, none of them surrendered. They fought to the last moment of their lives. Even at the last moment of their deaths, the billions of living beings in the kingdom remained silent and did not beg for mercy. They only had one thing to say. To live was to live while standing tall. He would die standing. There was also a top force, the Lord of a holy land, who only kept a trace of fire. After sending out the most talented disciples in his sect, he led more than 8,000 disciples of his sect to die brazenly. All of them self-destructed. The divine power universe never lacked blood. In the divine power universe, in the cold and lonely boundless starry sky, they had written one soul-stirring epic after another. The fleet of the Divine Life Palace was already getting closer and closer to the extreme north of the universe, in the direction of the 9 forbidden zones. In the cabin of the first cosmic boat, which was responsible for clearing the way, Jian Wushuang, Supreme Junfu, Supreme Shuebo, and the others were gathered together and discussing the issue of settling down. The 4 of them were gathered around a round table. On the table, a map was being formed using divine power. There was nothing else on the map, only the 9 forbidden zones. 5 of the 9 forbidden zones had been crossed by Jian Wushuang and the other 3. Palace Master, the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans each occupy a large forbidden area, while the Dark Demon and the Overlord Patriarch occupy other large forbidden zones. I'm afraid they won't let us in rashly during such an emergency. Therefore, we can only choose from these 4 forbidden zones. Supreme Shuebo's eyes flickered as he spoke in a deep voice. The ancient cavern, the tomb of the gods, the land of sorrows, the imperial ancestor ruins. No one has ever stepped into or come out of these 4 places. No one unknown what the situation is like. I'm afraid the danger level is extremely high. The ancient cavern, the tomb of the gods, the land of sorrow, the imperial ancestor ruins. These 4 places were the 4 forbidden lands that no one had ever set foot in. Jian Wushuang frowned and looked at the map that was formed by divine power. He did not speak but started to think quickly. He already had a basic understanding of these 4 places. First, it was the ancient cavern. It was said that the formation of the ancient cavern was at the beginning of the universe when the primordial chi split into 2. The clear chi rose and formed a dome-like sky, while the turbid chi sank and formed a thick earth. However, the foul air was not exhausted. The remaining impure energy gathered together and entered the northernmost area, forming the ancient cavern. It was rumored that there was a large amount of foul air reverberating day and night in the ancient cavern. It let out a huge rumbling sound that was enough to scrape off one's bones and flesh and annihilate one's soul. Even an invincible supreme would not be able to last for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. It was because of this that no one lived in the ancient cavern. It had always been the most spacious forbidden zone in the entire universe. Secondly, there was the tomb of the gods. There were many dead souls buried in the tomb of the gods. Most of these dead souls came from the great tribulation of the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans at the beginning of the universe, as well as the war with the Void universe that broke out after that. They were almighty dead souls who had died in the Great Tribulation. Therefore, the tombs of the gods were filled with the shocking fighting spirit of these powerful people before their death, as well as all kinds of emotions such as unwillingness, anger, and sadness. With these emotions present, even an invincible supreme would be affected mentally if they stayed inside for too long, turning them into complete lunatics. After thinking for a while, Jian Wushuang erased the 2 forbidden zones. The Divine Life Palace did not have an invincible supreme to keep watch over it, and it was far too dangerous to go to these 2 forbidden zones. It could be said that as long as Jian Wushuang dared to take the Divine Life Palace into these 2 forbidden zones, all the disciples of the Divine Life Palace would be annihilated in less than 10 breaths. As for Jian Wushuang, he would only be able to hold on for a few breaths. Jian Wushuang's thoughts were almost the same as theirs. Palace Master. Then the only forbidden zones we can choose are the desolate Gooseland and the Imperial Ancestor Ruins. Supreme Shuebo said in a deep voice. Yes, I know. Jian Wushuang nodded and looked at the last 2 forbidden zones on the map. the Land of Sorrows and the Imperial Ancestor Ruins were publicly acknowledged as the two most mysterious forbidden zones in the Divine Power universe. In the past, there had been two invincible supreme experts who had tried to kill each other and had escaped into the Imperial Ancestor Ruins. In the end, the two of them had never come out again. If it could be said that everyone still knew a thing or two about the Tomb of the Gods and the ancient cavern, then, when it came to the Land of Sorrows and the Imperial Ancestor Ruins, they would be in the dark. The only information he knew was that these two forbidden lands had been formed before the universe's chaos. Even before the universe's chaos. How long ago was that? Palace Master, which forbidden zone should we choose? Shuebo asked. Jian Wushuang thought for a while and shook his head. For us, the situation in these two forbidden zones is similar. We'll take one step at a time when we reach the extreme north of the universe. I guess that's the only way. When Supreme Shuebo and the others saw this, they could not help but look at each other and smile bitterly. The Divine Life Palace was one of the top forces in the Divine Power universe, but they had no power to fight back when the disaster struck. It was difficult for them to even find a place to hide, just as everyone was discussing. Thud, thud, thud. On the deck, there was a sudden rush of footsteps. Then, a disciple of the Divine Life Palace walked into the cabin in a hurry and said, "Palace Master, Supreme's Masters, there are refugees outside the boat. They want to ask for help." Eh? Refugees? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. The Shuebo Supreme explained, "Palace Master, you don't know this. When the Void Universe attacked, many disciples and elders from great powers lost their homes and drifted around the universe. They wanted to seek refuge and help. They were the refugees." Is that so? Jian Wushuang thought for a while and did not order him to take in the refugees. Instead, he said, "Let's go and see what's the situation." Then Jian Wushuang stood up and walked out of the cabin with Lung Rushuang. Shuebo, Junfu, Tianyi, and Ninth Culpa King, the four lead supremes, were slightly behind Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang walked to the deck of the cosmic boat and looked up. He saw a large crowd of people standing in front of the cosmic boat. These people were dressed in tattered clothes and their hair was disheveled. They were in a sorry state. The leader of the group was an old man with a head full of white hair hanging down, covering half of his face, and blood spots all over his body. One could tell at a glance that these people had probably gone through a brutal slaughter before escaping. "Sir, I was an elder of the Sky Yuan sect in the past. Please take me in." Seeing Jian Wushuang walk out, the leading old man immediately knelt down and kowtowed to Jian Wushuang. Behind him, the refugees from all over the world knelt one after another, pleading for him to take them in. "Husband, they're so pitiful. Please take them in." Lung Rushuang's heart softened when she saw this. Jian Wushuang did not reply. Instead, he stared at the man who claimed to be an elder of the Sky Yuan sect. After 10 breaths, he turned around and looked at the refugees behind him. "I'm sorry, our cabin is full and can't take in so many people," Jian Wushuang said expressionlessly. After he finished speaking, he turned around and wanted to return to the cabin. Lung Rushuang was stunned. She clearly remembered that there were still many seats in the cabin. However, she had always trusted Jian Wushuang, so she did not say anything more. Instead, she looked at the refugees carefully. With this look, she was shocked and saw something strange. The old man, who was the leader of the refugees, squinted his eyes when he saw Jian Wushuang turning to leave. Immediately after, he cried out, "My lord, please save us. We don't have a cosmic boat, so the people from the Void Universe will come and kill us. We'll all die. I beg you, my lord, please show mercy and save us." After he finished shouting, the refugees behind the old man also began to cry. Jian Wushuang stopped. He turned his head again and looked at the group of refugees. His expressionless face gradually became cold. "Run them over." Jian Wushuang looked at the refugees coldly and spat out 3 words. The old man's expression changed instantly. The next moment, the grief on his face disappeared and was replaced by a sinister look. "Run them over?" The disciples of the Divine Life Palace behind Jian Wushuang were all shocked. Palace Master, at most we can just stop them from boarding the ship. It's not very good to just run them over, right? A disciple of the Divine Life Palace stuttered. Jian Wushuang ignored him and stared at the old man, who was the leader of the refugees, with a cold expression. Hee hee. The mournful-looking old man suddenly laughed. Little kid, tell me, how did you see through it? The old man slowly stood up. The grief on his face had disappeared. Instead, he stuck out his tongue and licked the corner of his mouth. His eyes revealed a touch of greed. As the old man laid his cards on the table, the refugees behind him also stood up, their faces filled with ferocity. Chief, don't waste your breath on this little kid. Just kill them all and take their cosmic boats. One of the refugees stood behind the old man and laughed sinisterly. Jian Wushuang looked at the old man with contempt and said, If I'm not wrong, you just robbed someone, right? The divine blood in his body belongs to someone else, so it's hard not to be seen through. Is that so? The old man narrowed his eyes and looked down at the blood on his body. He seemed to have thought of something and said, Just now, there was a couple who didn't know what was good for them. All they needed to do was join us. I had no choice but to kill the man's cultivation partner in front of him, and then I crushed the man's divine body inch by inch. In the end, the man couldn't bear it and self-destructed. The old man raised his head and looked at Jian Wushuang and Lung Rushuang, who was next to him. With a lecherous look, he said, Little kid, you must be a smart person. You won't be so insensible, right? Before Jian Wushuang could do anything, Lung Rushuang flew into a rage. The long whip in her hand appeared out of thin air and cracked the void. It extended for thousands of miles and struck at the elder. Ha ha ha, you little girl, you're quite feisty. The old man laughed and rose into the sky, revealing his cultivation, the aura of a half-invincible supreme being spread out. He flicked his finger and Lung Rushuang's long whip was knocked away. A half-invincible supreme. The hearts of the Shuebo and the others sank. After all, with the death of Supreme Gai Fu, the person with the highest cultivation in the entire Divine Life Palace was Supreme Shuebo, who had just broken through not long ago. However, Supreme Shuebo had only just stepped into the half-invincible Supreme Realm not long ago, while this old man's aura was as deep as the abyss. Clearly, he was already an experienced half-invincible Supreme. Shuebo took a deep breath with a grave expression. There's no need. Jian Wushuang shook his head, squinted at the old man, and said indifferently, He's just an animal. Then, Jian Wushuang took a step forward, turned into a sword light, and rushed toward the elder. The clouds within 10,000 miles were all cut open. There was only a thin line left between heaven and earth. Oh! Feeling the bone-piercing sword chi, the old man was first shocked, but then he said in disdain, You're just an intermediate supreme martial artist. How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me? Be careful, Palace Master. Supreme Shuebo was also shocked when he saw Jian Wushuang rush over. Jian Wushuang had been away from the Divine Power Universe for more than 10,000 years, but Shuebo's impression of Jian Wushuang was that he was still a primary supreme, and his strength was at most at the top supreme level. Although Jian Wushuang had broken through to intermediate supreme, he was still a ways off to fight against a half-invincible supreme expert. Even Lung Rushuang's heart clenched. Jian Wushuang had left the Divine Power Universe for far too long. It had been so long that many people had already forgotten his combat strength. In the entire scene, only Ninth Culpa King had an indifferent expression. He was not worried about Jian Wushuang at all. He knew about Jian Wushuang's battle strength. Jian Wushuang might not be able to match an invincible supreme, because he had never tried it before. However, in the world, there was no existence below the invincible supreme that could withstand 10 moves from Jian Wushuang. Even Hell King, the most powerful 5-star Void Master in the Void Universe, had been killed by Jian Wushuang within 10 moves. What was this old man? Ha ha ha, Junior. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame this old man for. The old man laughed wildly, but before he could finish his sentence, his laughter stopped abruptly. A head was instantly separated from his neck and flew high into the air. Then, his body shattered like a mirror that had been smashed to the ground. How did you? The old man's face was filled with extreme shock as he looked at Jian Wushuang in horror. My lord, I failed to recognize your might. I didn't know that you're extraordinary. Please be magnanimous and forgive me. He frantically begged for mercy. You're noisy. Jian Wushuang stood proudly in the void and flicked his finger. Instantly, a sword light shot out from his fingertip and pierced through the man. Swish! In the next moment, the old man's head exploded like a watermelon. He could not be more dead. Supreme Shuebo, who had been about to charge out, suddenly stopped in his tracks, and a look of shock appeared in his eyes. A half-invincible Supreme was killed by Jian Wushuang in one move? As for the refugees who followed the old man, when they saw the situation, they were deathly silent. Immediately, Mother of God! The refugees shrieked in fear and fled. Jian Wushuang patted his waist with his right hand and the Tarot Divine Sword was instantly unsheathed. Like a white dragon, it rushed forward and killed them one by one. A moment later, the Tarot Divine Sword returned to its scabbard. In a flash, Jian Wushuang returned to the deck of the cosmic boat from the boundless void. Supreme Shuebo finally came to his senses. He grabbed Jian Wushuang's arm and asked, Palace Master, is your current battle prowess comparable to an invincible Supreme's? I don't know, but I think I can put up a fight. Jian Wushuang smiled. This was not because he was arrogant, but because he was confident. Jian Wushuang had not only broken through to the intermediate Supreme realm and improved his cultivation greatly, but he had also obtained all the cultivation comprehensions given by Supreme Dao Yen, the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace. He refined this comprehension every day, and his strength seemed to double with each day, like a boat rising with the tide. The only reason he was not sure was that he had not had the chance to truly fight an invincible Supreme yet. For the time being, Jian Wushuang was far inferior to the Supreme experts like the Overlord Patriarch and Supreme Gaifu. However, Jian Wushuang was confident that he could fight against the weaker invincible Supremes like the Temple Master of Cosmos Temple, Supreme Heiyu. All right, let's go. After a while, Jian Wushuang returned to the cabin. The entire fleet of the Divine Life Palace continued to sail and left this place in a flash. In the boundless starry sky, they were getting closer and closer to the extreme north where the 9 forbidden zones were located. 3 months later, the fleet of the Divine Life Palace gradually left the bustling area and came to the extreme north of the universe. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the deck of the entire cosmic boat was covered in a thick layer of frost. In front of him was a cold and lonely starry sky. 9 millstone-shaped galaxies were quietly hovering in front of him, emitting a biting cold. Of the 9 forbidden zones, the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans had already taken up 3 of them. With the Overlords and the Dark Demons taking up 2 of them, there were only 4 forbidden zones left. As for the Ancient Cavern and the Tomb of the Gods, Jian Wushuang had already eliminated them from his expectations. Thus, only the Imperial Ancestor Ruins and the Land of Sorrows were left. Jian Wushuang looked at the 2 forbidden zones and his eyes flickered. He began to think carefully. These 2 forbidden zones were formed before the universe was created, so no one knew what was inside. Therefore, the level of danger was no different to Jian Wushuang. Palace Master, I think we should go to the Imperial Ancestor Ruins, Supreme Shuebo said. Oh? Why? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and asked. Supreme Shuebo chuckled and shook his head. I don't know either. It's just a gut feeling. I feel that there's a great fortune in the Imperial Ancestor Ruins. All right, let's go to the Imperial Ancestor Ruins. Jian Wushuang was stunned and then said. The cosmic boat let out a loud roar and sailed toward the Imperial Ancestor Ruins. Just as the cosmic boat was about to arrive at the galaxy entrance leading to the Imperial Ancestor Ruins, in the cosmic boat, an ordinary disciple suddenly knelt on the ground with a bang. His stomach turned and he vomited. Blarg. In an instant, countless pieces of flesh and blood were spat out from the disciple's mouth. Among them was a black corpse puppet the size of a finger. Junior brother Mu Yi, what's wrong? What is this? Instantly, the other disciples around him were shocked and looked at him in confusion. Now that they were about to enter the Imperial Ancestor Ruins, All the disciples were tense and held their breath. They were extremely nervous. Eh? What's wrong? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked back. The corpse puppet jumped on the deck and turned into a black light, piercing toward the galaxy where the Imperial Ancestor ruins were. The 9 forbidden zones were all independent small worlds, and the entrance to the passage was in the center of the galaxy. At this moment, in the center of the galaxy of the Imperial Ancestor ruins, a black-clothed figure stood with his hands behind his back, stepping on a meteorite. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and his entire person was filled with a cold aura. Whoosh! The corpse puppet automatically landed on the black-clothed figure's shoulder and then slid into his body through the gap in his collar. Jian Wushuang looked at the scene and gradually frowned. This back view gave him a familiar feeling. The next moment, the black-clothed man turned around slowly and looked at Jian Wushuang. He said 2 words expressionlessly, "Wushuang." As he finished speaking, the face of the man in black appeared from the shadows. This person was the God-refining sect master, Void Master Ba Huang. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's heart sank and his pupils shrank. Why would this person appear here? Void Master Ba Huang looked at Jian Wushuang coldly and said, "Wushuang, you didn't expect me to appear here, did you? When you disguised yourself as the sect master of Crimson Whale Gang and sneaked into the 87th Void Rift, I had a faint suspicion. Only after the battle had gone on did I finally confirm that it was you." Jian Wushuang did not answer. Now, he could already guess the reason for the appearance of Void Master Ba Huang. During the battle, Void Master Ba Huang had secretly placed a corpse puppet to track his movements. What's going on? Who is this person? The scene behind Jian Wushuang was in chaos. Jian Wushuang stretched out his hand and gestured for the disciples of the Divine Life Palace to be quiet. Then he raised his head and looked at Void Master Ba Huang. He said calmly, "Ba Huang, what do you want to do now?" "What do I want?" Void Master Ba Huang snorted and said angrily, "Wushuang, I have always treated you well. You killed Elder Shen Lian and his son, but I did not pursue it. I even personally gave you the position of the God-refining sect master and placed you at the peak. Do you still remember Elder Mi Feng? How did he treat you in the past? Back then, he protected you at all costs in front of me. Has anyone in my God-refining sect ever mistreated you? But what about you? You disregarded the entire God-refining sect and betrayed the Void Universe. Let me ask you, do you feel any guilt?" At the end, Void Master Ba Huang's voice was like thunder, rumbling and deafening. Jian Wushuang fell silent again. After a long while, he took a deep breath and replied, "I'm sorry." The sect master snorted coldly. His eyes flickered and he replied, "Wushuang, now that the Divine Power Universe has been defeated, there is no chance of turning the tables. I will give you one last chance. As long as you abandon the dark side and join the light, and kill all the people from the sect behind you, I will forgive your previous actions. You will still be the new sect master of the God-refining sect. How about it?" As soon as he finished speaking, the God-refining sect master stared at Jian Wushuang. It was as if he would attack if Jian Wushuang dared to say, "I refuse." Jian Wushuang remained expressionless and slowly held the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword. "Ba Huang, there's no point in talking. Let's fight." Jian Wushuang's answer was clear. "You're so stubborn and stupid." Void Master Ba Huang snorted and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "Wushuang, you'll be buried with the Divine Power Universe." Bang! In an instant, the Void Master Ba Huang took a step forward and the meteorite under his feet shattered. His entire body had already turned into a flowing light and was shooting toward Jian Wushuang. The aura of a six-scar Void Master was released completely, like a raging sea and raging waves. "Supreme Shuebo, I'll stop him. You take the disciples of the Divine Life Palace and enter the Land of Sorrows." Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and unsheathed his sword as well. After saying that, Jian Wushuang turned into a sword light that pierced through the sky and earth and charged at Void Master Ba Huang. Ba Hang, a six-scar Void Master, was an invincible supreme expert in the Divine Power Universe. This was Jian Wushuang's first time fighting against an invincible supreme. My husband. Seeing this, Lung Rushuang's expression changed. She stood up and wanted to rush out. Whoosh! A big hand grabbed Lung Rushuang's sleeve. Supreme Shui Bo's expression turned grave as he shook his head. Palace Mistress, we can't interfere in this battle. We will only drag Palace Mistress down if we stay here. Listen to Palace Mistress. Let's head to the desolate wildlands first. As soon as he finished speaking, Supreme Shui Bo steered the cosmic boat and turned the bow around. With a loud boom, the cosmic boat shot toward the Land of Sorrows, which was next to the Imperial Ancestor ruins. Bang! Like two burning meteorites, Jian Wushuang and Void Master Ba Huang crashed into each other. A violent explosion was heard. Then, a figure was sent flying backward, drawing a long straight line in the void and leaving a long gully. The person who was sent flying was Jian Wushuang. Is this the power of an invincible supreme? Golden divine blood flowed out of the corner of Jian Wushuang's mouth. His perlicue trembled violently and his blood and qi were in turmoil. It had to be said that the power of an invincible supreme was far beyond that of an ordinary supreme. Even a casual strike from him was not something that an ordinary supreme could compare to. Jian Wushuang could be said to be an expert below the invincible supreme level, but he was no match for a casual attack from Void Master Ba Huang. You want to escape? Void Master Ba Huang snorted and looked at the fleet of the Divine Life Palace that was flying toward the ancient cavern. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Although he did not know what was inside the Land of Sorrows, his six-scar Void Master's sharp intuition told him that if he allowed this group of people to escape to the Land of Sorrows, he was afraid that he would no longer be able to kill them and would only be in trouble. Go! He waved his right hand, and a massive divine corpse with a withered face and eyes like rotten grapes walked out from the void behind him. This divine corpse was also a six-scar divine corpse. In an instant, the divine corpse took a step forward, leaving an afterimage in the void as he charged toward the fleet of the Divine Life Palace that was less than 1,000 feet away from the entrance of the Land of Sorrows. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and used sundering stars to stop the divine corpse. Then, in the void behind Jian Wushuang, the Tarot divine corpse also took a step forward. With a flash of his body, he had already crashed into the six-scar level divine corpse. The aura of a high supreme was exuding from the corpse. During this period of time, Jian Wushuang not only digested the cultivation comprehension given to him by the Supreme Dao Yen and improved his strength, but he also did not neglect the cultivation of the Tarot divine corpse. The corpse of Supreme Tarot had the initial cultivation base of a top supreme realm, and there were no obstacles in his recovery. He had unknowingly reached the high supreme realm. The divine corpse of the Tarot turned into a sword and flew forward on it. Wind and thunder rolled, and he crashed into the six-scar level divine corpse, leaving a sword mark as thick as a fingernail on the surface of its body. When Supreme Tarot was still alive, he was able to kill an invincible supreme with his top supreme realm cultivation. Although he was only a divine corpse now, his combat instincts were enough to resist the divine corpse of Void Master Ba Huang. To Jian Wushuang, this was enough. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang finally heaved a sigh of relief. The current him could finally fight without holding back. Bastard! When Void Master Ba Huang saw this, his face turned green. How could he not recognize that the divine corpse that Jian Wushuang had just sent out was the one that Jian Wushuang had obtained in the God-refining sect's Coffin Mountain? Wushuang, you deserve to die. A cold light flashed in the eyes of Void Master Ba Huang. He clapped his hands and a large amount of void power gathered in his hands, turning into two dark light balls, which he slapped toward Jian Wushuang. Good! Jian Wushuang waved his sleeve. There was no fear in his eyes. Instead, his battle intent surged to the extreme. Between his brows, a purple Chuan character appeared faintly like blood. His eyes turned into a pale golden color, and the qi and blood in his body rolled, making a muffled sound like a war hammer. This was the phenomenon produced when the Chaos Overlord body was stimulated to the extreme. Fight! Jian Wushuang spat out the word. The next moment, his entire body turned into a sword light that broke the twilight sky. He cut the sky and the earth into a line and instantly slashed toward Void Master Ba Huang. Petty tricks. Void Master Ba Huang snorted coldly and flew up to fight with Jian Wushuang. Bang! 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 One after another, rumbling sounds came from where the two of them were fighting. It was as if two giant beasts were fighting. Open sky, sundering stars, eternal night, daybreak. One after another, the divine power sword moves that had allowed Jian Wushuang to kill countless enemies were all performed by Jian Wushuang. However, it was useless. Everything was useless. Void Master Ba Huang's void power surged in his hands and crushed them as if he was holding two bolts of lightning. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged more than 100 moves. Is this the power of an invincible supreme? Jian Wushuang, who had been pushed back 1,000 feet and had cracks on his divine body, exclaimed in surprise. A hair's breadth. He was still a hair's breadth away from becoming an invincible supreme. Although this difference did not seem like much, it was like a huge chasm that he could not cross in a short period of time. However, Jian Wushuang was amazed. He did not know how great a storm was surging in the heart of Void Master Ba Huang. According to the conversion of realms in the Void universe, Jian Wushuang's current cultivation realm was only at the level of a 2-scar Void Master, while he was a 6-scar Void Master, an existence that stood at the peak of the entire universe. Although Void Master Ba Huang had not used any earth-shattering killing moves in the previous exchange, the power of his attack was enough to kill all Void Masters below the 6-scar level. As for Jian Wushuang, although he was being suppressed, he was not in any life-threatening situation. A monster. If he was not killed, he would become a great threat to the Void universe in the future. At the thought of this, a hint of killing intent appeared in the eyes of Void Master Ba Huang. He no longer intended to hold back and wanted to kill Jian Wushuang directly. Wushuang, prepare to die. I've already given you a chance to choose a new camp, but you didn't cherish it. Don't blame me for being merciless, Void Master Ba Huang said coldly. A small whirlpool appeared in his hands and endless void power started to gather. A destructive aura spread out and crushed the ancient void. Before that, Jian Wushuang had already used his most powerful killing move. Tarot Sword Manual, 5th Form, Tarot. Swish. In an instant, a shocking sword intent soared into the sky, shaking the world and breaking through the clouds. The green-robed sword god's figure appeared behind Jian Wushuang. As Jian Wushuang waved his sword, he cut off a vast sword light that was hundreds of thousands of feet wide. This sword had never failed, and it had killed all its enemies in the world. This sword move had once destroyed everything like rotten wood and had not been defeated once. After slashing with the sword, Jian Wushuang did not even look at the result. Divine power burst out from his legs, and he rushed toward the entrance of the Land of Sorrows. He had never imagined that this sword could kill Void Master Ba Huang, as it was not something he could do at the moment. He only needed to distract Void Master Ba Huang with this sword attack, which would be enough to make him step into the Land of Sorrows.